Alrighty, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Tailspin. Mav, I'm your host here tonight. Tonight, the question is, are DMT encounters extraordinarily hallucinations, or could the human brain actually be accessing something real? Welcome, everyone. If you're new to Tailspin, we're here every day, Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. and we speak truth, fire with no spin. Tonight, we're going somewhere that sits directly in the intersection of neuroscience, consciousness, psychedelics, artificial intelligence, non human intelligence, and the nature of reality itself. We have our special guest tonight, Dr. Andrew Gallimore. Andrew is a computational neurobiologist, a pharmacologist, a chemist, and author, and he spent more than 2 decades thinking seriously about one of the strangest molecules known to science, DMT. He earned his PhD in biological chemistry from the University of Cambridge and has been researching DMT for 2 decades. Thank you for joining us here tonight, Andrew. I think it's one of your first times on Spaces. If you need any help with how the application works, I'll be more than happy to go over that with you. But thank you for joining us here tonight.
Good morning. Nice to be here. Can you hear me?
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I can hear you. You sound great.
Fabulous.
Let me add my co-host here. Just for anyone out there, also pinned up top is one of Andrew's new book. Came out in July of this year. The Death of Astonishment, Confronting the Mystery of the World's Strangest Drug, explores the discovery of DMT and science's ongoing struggle to explain the extraordinary on human mind. Andrew, I think so. The first question I have for you is, how did you end up getting into the field of working with DMT and your experience with it going back 2 decades?
Well, I guess when I was a teenager, when I was a child, I was very interested in unusual things, right? So the occult and ghosts and vampires and werewolves and all that kind of stuff when I was very young. I wanted to be a ghost hunter, and that didn't work out. And so as I became an adolescent, I kind of shifted slightly away from unusual phenomena, so to speak, and more towards unusual states of consciousness. And psychedelics provide arguably the most interesting and unusual states of consciousness one can achieve. This side of the yawning grave, as McKenna would say. And DMT, in my opinion, is. Some would argue that salvia is also up there, and I would agree. But I think DMT is the most efficient way of altering the entire nature of your reality. The entire structure of your existence as a conscious being. And so, yes, I started studying it, learning about it when I was a teenager, but not seriously initially until I started going through the academy, so to speak, and studying chemistry and pharmacology and neuroscience, and because that's what you need really to understand DMT. I think you have to have a grounding and in quite a few different scientific disciplines, and basically the more I learned about the brain and the more I learned about DMT, the more confounded, the more confused and amazed I was by this molecule. And I think that's really what most of my work is doing, really. I'm not trying to kind of prove anything to anyone. I'm simply trying to show people that actually there is far more to this molecule, and that is a true mystery in the sense that neuroscience continues, in my opinion, to struggle to explain many of the features, the characteristics of the DMT state. And the question is, what do we do with that? How do we interpret that? How is it possible that DMT can effect such remarkable changes in the structure and dynamics of our consciousness, such that entirely new, staggeringly coherent and staggeringly complex alternate worlds filled with non-human, non-animal beings spontaneously emerge when the brain is perturbed by this simple molecule? I don't think that's simple to explain. Yeah, and so here we are, still trying to explain it.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I've never tried. Well, I got to put a disclaimer out. Disclaimer: we're not discussing anything to promote the use of psychedelic drugs or anything of that nature. This is for educational purposes only, and these are studies that have been done by a doctor. So take all that into consideration before you delete this space on me, because I was already warned by X that I was borderline, Andrew. So,
Right.
little disclaimer out there that we're not promoting the use of psychedelic drugs. We're just experimenting the research on them. Uh, yeah, I was already direct messaged by X about the topic. I'm like, no, 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 I'm not promoting it. We're just going to discuss it. But the terms of service popped up. Crazy. Uh, but yeah, I've done some research on you, and I know you said you're into werewolves, vampires, and things. And I was listening to one podcast I thought was pretty interesting. You had gotten in trouble for your writing of stories when you were a child.
Mm.
Um, I don't know if you want to get into that at all. I thought that was pretty interesting. I think it shows your ability to think outside the box, so to speak. But it kind of got you in a little bit of trouble in boarding school, I believe.
Well, it wasn't boarding school. No, it was a regular school. But well, I mean, I grew up in a quite a large family. Well, by modern standards, at least, I have four brothers, no sisters. So it's very two older brothers who were a huge influence on me. And so they were always kind of several steps ahead in growing up. And so my oldest brother was very interested in kind of horror movies and these old kind of banned movies. This was back in the VHS days when you used to send like a few dollars to some random guy, and they send you back this copy of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Cannibal Holocaust or something like that. And my parents were kind of very liberal, and so I used to watch these horror movies. And yeah, it came out in my writing. At school when the teachers would ask me to write a story, and most people were writing about unicorns and My Little Pony or whatever, and I was writing about people being hacked to pieces, which is funny looking back, but you can imagine why it caused some degree of alarm. But there was nothing. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't like some growing up to be Michael Myers or anything. Well, that was also one of my favorite movies. Um, but no, I was just very heavily influenced by my older brothers. I think a lot of my interests, my music, my taste in music, and my taste in movies and art, and a lot of that actually came from my oldest brother. Not the interest in psychedelics, mind you, that was entirely self-cultivated. But yeah, I think it's very interesting what happens when you grow up in a certain environment and you have siblings around you and you kind of cross-fertilize each other, and share ideas and share experiences and tastes, and it has effect on you for your entire life, I think. So yeah, so the headmaster had to call him the principal had to call him my dad and say that yeah, this is look at this is ridiculous. You've got babies being cut up and just horrible stuff when you think about it. But I just got it from the movies. I wasn't really crazy. I just got it from movies. So maybe that influenced my interests in unusual things as I grew up. But I wouldn't change it.
No, I found it very interesting. I thought maybe that could have like some impact at your ability to, think differently than everyone else and kind of drew you into the openness that you showed with your research. Well, with your new book, I loved on your site when you explained it in that 5-minute clip on YouTube,
Mm.
how you went through all these different, you taking DMT yourself, And I never knew this until I started to do some research for this show that it's short-lived. It's not like LSD or some of those other drugs, psychedelic drugs. It can last for 1 to 2 minutes, but the experiences are 10x of the other type of psychedelic drugs. Is that true?
Yeah, so I mean, mercifully for most people, DMT it's like a roller coaster rather than a kind of a long, slow, meandering ride. It's like you're fired into the space. You inhale it, and most people inhale it. Some people inject it, but standard is to vaporize it in a small glass pipe or using one of these e-liquid devices that people have, or these days, or dab rigs. Inhale, a solid lungful of pure DMT vapor. Terence McKenna used to say 3 hits, take the third hit, but in fact, he was probably he was probably burning a lot of it. I think one good hit, um, a good lungful, empty lungs, fill your lungs up with the vapor and hold it in, and yeah, within a few seconds you will know something pretty remarkable is happening, and then within 30 seconds you lie back, close your eyes, and hold on tight, basically, because you'll be in a world, another world that is completely disjoint from the normal waking world, that has no apparent relationship to our normal waking reality. Is far more complex, that is um, often described as hyper-technological, a world that appears to be constructed by the hand of some immense and seemingly timeless, um, thoroughly alien intelligence. I'm not saying alien, but like gray beings or something like this, but something that is completely other is another good way to put it, I think. And it's populated more often than not, it's populated by a kind of a panoply of beings that are unlike anything that you would ever encounter in the normal waking world. That appear to be far more advanced, far more intelligent, far more technologically and cognitively sophisticated than any earthly being. And this is consistent, fairly consistent, across users. Every trip is different, but these kind of reports are kind of the characteristic of DMT. Um, but once you're in there, you reach the peak within, if you look at blood levels, as Strasman did in the 90s, you reach the peak after a couple of minutes, and then you're kind of the exponential fall down, the exponential drop down happens from that point, and then you are rapidly kind of dragged back out of the space. So the entire experience is really only about 5 minutes. Some people say, 10, 15, 20 minutes. I think that's massively overstated. It's actually much shorter than that. Sure, you have some after effects, and you'll still have some psychedelic like effects, but you're in and out of that world very, very quickly. It might feel like a lot longer, but really the kind of entrance and exit of the space occurs within about 4, 5 minutes maximum, really. Um, and then you're kind of shaken and stirred, very much so, shocked, appalled, astonished, true astonishment, um, and left to wonder what the fuck just happened to you, which is what was my very first experience more than 20 years ago was like. It was a condition of just shaking and thinking this is not possible, that I had this experience, and yet there it was. It was undeniable in its presence. It was undeniable to me that I had been somehow interfacing with some kind of um, entirely unexpected intelligence, that was completely unlike any earthly intelligence. And yeah, the rest is history, and that I've really spent the last 20 years trying to understand, what on earth is going on with this molecule.
That's so interesting. I would be afraid, afraid to try, personally, because I don't know, I don't know. But it definitely is. It definitely sounds very interesting. Have you noticed, with your studies that regardless of where your upbringing was or your religious beliefs, the things that people witness or encounter are similar, or are they different based upon region and religion?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, there haven't been any. Um, there've been quite a few phenomenological studies that have looked at the structure and the content and the types of entities that people regularly encounter, and there is massive overlap in that there are certain types of entities feature again and again. The machine elves being the most famous residents of the DMT space, but reptilians and insectoids and goddesses and gods and beings that really defy any kind of categorization, beings that simply cannot be described, that are unenglishable, as McKenna would say. But no, I don't think there've been, and there should be really more, kind of formal studies looking at, if we take a group of individuals. I mean, most of the problem is that there are obviously legal and ethical problems, and there's a lot of red tape to go through to do DMT studies. So you're right. Most studies have basically two types of studies that have been done. Phenomenological studies. One is a standard kind of recruitment study where you would recruit people to take DMT. That was Strassman's study, but again, he had some other, officially he was looking at physiological effects like effects on blood pressure and stuff, boring stuff. But obviously the most important thing that came out of his study were the trip reports. But he was just looking for people who were had some experience with psychedelics and that could handle the experience. He certainly wasn't looking for specific demographics or particular religions or anything like this. And it was a relatively small study, in 60 people, which is the biggest of its kind that's ever been done with DMT, but still relatively small in the grand scheme of things. If you want to be partitioning people into different groups, then you probably need a very large study. And that's so the second type of study is more of a trip report harvesting study where you would mine internet forums, such as Reddit or the DMT Nexus or Erowid, and there you can gather thousands of trip reports, and you can look for much more detailed data, and you can classify different types of experiences much more effectively. But often the data that you get, kind of demographic data on people's religious beliefs and all that kind of stuff is missing, and so you can't do that. And so, the short answer to your question is that study hasn't been done, so we don't know, basically, apart from anecdotal reports. But generally, the kind of the take home message is that DMT is variable and yet consistent in different ways. Nobody's going to have exactly the same experience twice, and yet if you looked at 100 or 1,000 trip reports, you can definitely see patterns in the type of beings, the type of spaces. Even to the point of people discussing on forums. Have you been to here? Have you been to here? Have you seen this entity? And people will say, yes, I spoke to this one. I saw this one as well. So there is some. There are these commonalities, in that people do tend to meet and interact with the same kinds of entities on a regular basis. But the study that you're suggesting hasn't been done, and I'm not sure if and when it will be done. You could do a small study, I guess, with 30 people on each arm, and look at people from an atheistic tradition or an atheistic worldview versus people who are born again Christians or something like that. If they wanted to do DMT, maybe they would see more likely to see angels and um, Christ or something. But we just don't know yet.
I know you said you did it the first time. What did you encounter? Did the machine elves, was it uh reptilians?
No.
Because I do notice, and I know Doomer was going to ask this question. Your at handle, alien insect. So of course, right away, those in the UFO community were like, He's seen a mantis. He's seen a mantis. What's your take on that?
Well, no, I mean my first experience, didn't I didn't see specific entities. But that there was more of an undeniable presence of some vast intelligence. I'm not so, form isn't so interesting to me. I think forms can be, the form that an entity takes, I think that can be deceptive. For example, when someone sees something like an alien insect, right? Insectoid beings obviously feature in the DMT trip report literature. They also feature heavily in other kind of reports from the kind of the UAP kind of side of things, which I think are tightly connected in many ways. But I don't think when you interact with an insectoid being in the DMT space, for example, you're actually interacting with a being that is actually an insect or an actually insectoid. But I think we are visual creatures, and these beings take on forms. These beings are rendered, if you like, within our interface. They're rendered by our cortical architecture. This is how we make sense of the world. But there's no reason to assume that these intelligences could be faithfully rendered in any kind of visual form. I certainly don't think there's any reason to assume that whatsoever. So I don't think if you see a machine elf, you're actually seeing beings that are actually elves. You're seeing beings that have certain characteristics and certain types of character, certain types of intelligence, certain types of behaviors, but I don't think they're necessarily elves in the same way. I don't think if you see a reptilian, you're actually dealing with a being that exists from its own side as a reptile. I mean, why would an intelligence, some kind of entirely non-earthly intelligence, actually possess the form of an earthly being? That's doesn't necessarily seem to make much sense. So forms, I think, can be, and they will often make this clear. I mean, there are trip reports where people have seen this mantid-like being and actually asked it, are you really an insect? Are you really a fucking insect? And the response is, well, no, but this is it wouldn't make sense to you if we showed you our true form. So I think that's kind of, in the same way you might interact with some kind of digital um, avatar in some way on a computer, for example. Um, if you're interacting with some avatar on a computer, it doesn't really have that form. Really, it has this kind of non-visual form that exists within the computational architecture, but it makes sense to you, and you can interact with it in this particular visual avatar. So I think that's how I see entities. I think these are visual avatars of something that perhaps cannot be rendered in any kind of visual form that would make sense to us.
Well, that's very interesting. It makes a lot of sense, right? Just like we're having a conversation here, but I'm really not a pixelated dog, right?
Right.
Um, uh, Something you had described DMT as behaving almost like a reality switching technology.
Mm.
Um, could you explain that? Why you think it's technological and not chemical or hallucination?
Well, there's several questions in there, but I mean, in reality switch, I mean, this is really, again, this is a McKenna phrase. He used to say that it's DMT is a 100% reality channel switch, um, because what it's doing, I mean, all psychedelics, what they do is they perturb your cortical world building machinery. So we all carry around this world building machine in our head called our brain, which is constantly constructing on the fly a model of the environment. So we never have direct access to the environment in itself, but we have access to this model that's constantly being constructed by our brain, that is constantly being updated based upon this stream of sensory inputs. But you're not seeing the world kind of as it is. It's not like a video camera. Your brain has to construct its own model of whatever is going on outside in the environment, which we never have direct access to. And what psychedelics do is they disrupt that model. So with let's say a low dose of LSD, there is a kind of loosening and what's the word? The world kind of goes from being very stable and predictable as it should be in the normal waking state into being much more fluid and dynamic. This is often, for example, described by Robin Carhart Harris as a kind of an entropic state or a hot state of the brain, where the world becomes much more fluid and less predictable, much more dynamic, and that really characterizes the world altering effects of psychedelics. But with DMT, it's like I always describe it as like moving between two channels on an old radio set, with the old dial. Or one of those old televisions, which going back, well, a long time now, but we used to have one in a black and white one in my parents' house many, 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 many years ago. And I was very young, and you had a dial, and you switch channels by moving the dial, much like a radio set. And in a way, it's like psychedelics is like nudging the dial, and so the picture becomes distorted and becomes much more dynamic, and then eventually it just collapses into noise and chaos. But if you keep turning the dial, eventually this entirely new channel kind of crackles into view, just as crisp and clear as the other channel, but completely different. And in the same way, I think DMT is kind of pushing the brain further rather than simply making the world model more fluid and dynamic. It's like it's pushing, pushing, pushing until it sort of collapses into this entirely new order, this entirely new world model. Because the DMT world that you experience is also a model. It's also represented in your brain, just as the normal waking world model is. You can't experience a world as a human being unless it has some kind of representation in your cortex. That's a different question to the ontology. Is it real? That's a separate question. But certainly, that's why I describe DMT as a reality channel switch, is because it's changing that world model. It's switching the world model, which is quite difficult to explain how it achieves this, from the normal waking world model to this entirely different alien world model. And it does it with such crisp efficiency, which is why I see it more as a technology. I use the term technology to get back to your original question, not because I think it was designed. I'm not an intelligent designer. I'm not a 21st century neo-intelligent designer who's thinking about the simulator or anything like that. But I use the term technology simply because I think there's this crisp efficiency. It's almost like a neurochemical device that kind of slots into the brain and switches the channel with such crisp efficiency that it feels more like a technology. It feels like that. It feels less like a drug. It doesn't feel like you're just on a drug in the same way that you might be with LSD or something. It feels like you've inserted this neurochemical device into your brain that switched your reality channel to something entirely different.
Wow, that's definitely interesting. Like I said, I've never tried it. I don't want to try. Oh, or maybe I'll think about it a little bit. But yeah, I mean, was there lasting like effects afterwards? Can you still like is your memory clear on everything you experienced? Just doing some research, I've heard people say they can't even explain what they've seen or heard. Um, they don't even know how to put it in words. Is that something that's lasting? Does it can you have like flashbacks, dreams later on afterwards, or is it just kind of gone when it wears off?
Well, it varies between different individuals, but for most for most individuals, yes, it's, again, to use that word, unenglishable, in that our language developed to describe the world, right? The environment in which we normally exist, the normal waking world. That's what our language is built for. And so when you try and apply that language to an entirely alien world that has no relationship to the normal waking world in terms of its structure, in terms of what's possible and what's not possible, in terms of its complexity and everything. It's completely different, and so the words just don't exist in many senses to actually describe in English or in any language, any earthly language, what happened within the space. And so people will tend to find themselves kind of rambling because they can't find any words. It's like what they experience is completely impossible. It was completely unanticipated, could not have been predicted, and cannot be explained or described. That's pretty standard. Experienced people can often, I mean, Strassman has, a catalogue of reports where people were able to describe in some detail exactly what happened to them. So it's like you have to kind of um, take something that is, 9 dimensional and kind of take this lower dimensional projection of it in order to actually say something about it. And so there are a lot, features you can describe within the space. You can never describe it fully, but you can take certain features. You can say, "Oh, I interacted with this kind of being, and it was doing this, and it was doing that, and I was in this kind of space, which seemed like a dome, or it seemed like." Some kind of waiting room, or you can certain things you can pull out of the space, and you get better at doing that the more you do it, and also you get better at remembering it. And again, memory is a process of reconstruction. When you remember something, it's your brain effectively reconstructing to some extent what you experienced, and your brain in the DMT state it's state dependent in that it's very difficult for the brain to reconstruct it unless um, there is DMT present. And so often people will ramble for several minutes when they come out of the DMT state, and then it disappears, like a very very strange dream, in that they knew something profound just happened to them, but it's gone. It's like the memory system, which was again evolved to reconstruct earthly experiences, um, don't function. And so most people kind of forget. But then once they're back in the DMT state, maybe a few weeks later, they go back, and then instantaneously there's that recognition and memory again. The memory starts working because they're back into that state. And there's this instantaneous recognition. So, this is it. I'm back. So yeah, working with DMT, I think it takes a lot of practice and experience because of these inherent limitations. You have to kind of train your brain, train your mind to actually reconstruct and render these experiences, and take things out of them that you can English, that you can actually speak about in a meaningful and coherent manner. So yeah, most people when they take it, they will be shocked and astonished, and basically have nothing to say beyond that, other than I don't know, what the hell just happened to me, and I can't explain it. And then slowly they'll forget about it, which is merciful in some senses. Most people not don't necessarily want to reconstruct what is an ontologically shattering experience that completely kind of extirpates the entire ontological foundation of your reality, everything that you thought that was possible or not possible, everything that you thought was real and not real, imaginary and etc. That's all gone, and you're faced with something that completely shatters any presumptions and assumptions about the nature of reality. And for many people, they don't want to deal with that. They want to get back into the normal waking world and kind of live their life and raise their children and feed the dog. They don't want to have to deal with the fact that there's this immense intelligence that is right here, right now, and just kind of waiting for them to return. That's kind of for many people at least, it's kind of a horrifying idea. So yeah, you have to work with DMT if you want to. I mean, there's nothing wrong, I think, with just going in there and experiencing it and say, okay, that was incredible, and then getting on with your life. I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. But for many people, they are drawn back, and they want to kind of try and make sense of it. But I'm not sure it is possible to make sense of it, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. I mean, I haven't been successful entirely. I have some insights, I guess, um, over the last 20 years, but it's still as much a mystery, profound mystery to me as it is to anyone else.
It's extremely interesting. I think it was in one of your, uh, I think it was on your timeline. Someone had used DMT, and they were like, and I think you you were like, that's exactly what it's like. I think he mentioned that he first felt as if he knew everything that he was
Mm.
experiencing, and then he acknowledged, like, at some point he was willing to forget about the world he ended up in taking DMT, but it was like a familiarity, like he was there before and then was willing to forget about it to live here.
Yeah, I mean, what's kind of there's a couple of remarkable things. Well, there's many remarkable things about DMT, but one is that even the very first time, there is this profound sense of familiarity. It's often described as kind of an intense sense of deja vu, and the beings will often, say to you, chant, deja vu, and there's a sense of homecoming. And this is often made explicit. The bells are ringing, the lights are flashing. It's like some great party. Terence McKenna used to talk about this a lot. This great hurrah, this great celebratory uproar as you enter the space, and they're kind of welcoming you home, and it feels like home. It feels like you've been there before, and that you are, in a sense, returning home in some way. And then there's this what you were describing there. Often people will describe, for example, extremely complex technological or mathematical structures, like blueprints and uh, highly complex and strange technological diagrams, like blueprints for the time machine or blueprints for the construction of a universe, and all this completely insane and wild stuff, and it makes sense to them at the time. Everything, this downloads of information. The download effect is a very commonly described experience where there is this massive rush, this influx of information, like you've opened the gates, and this information floods into you, and it all makes perfect sense at the time. But then when you come out of the space, it's like it's gone. Pulling anything out of it seems impossible. It's like your brain isn't wired to kind of make sense of it in the normal waking state. Like you've dropped back down into this lower form, this lower dimensional form that simply cannot render or make sense of. It's like if you were thrust into a six-dimensional space, and you were presented with a six-dimensional hypercube in six-dimensional space. It would look as normal as a three-dimensional cube looks to us in the normal waking state, and it would just look like a six-dimensional cube. Nothing strange about that, within the space. But then when you come out again, it's like trying to imagine that six-dimensional cube would be impossible, because again, it's a state-dependent thing. Your brain simply can't, imagine a four-dimensional cube, let alone a five or six or high-dimensional cube. And that, again, I think that seems to be something quite characteristic with DMT, is it seems to open up um, spatial and geometric and topological dimensionalities that the brain simply cannot render in anything other than a highly abstract mathematical forms. If you're a mathematician, you might be able to look at representations on paper that make sense to you, but actually imagining what a seven-dimensional topological manifold actually looked like, you can't do it. But in the DMT space, you seem able to do that. You seem to be presented with, often by elves, you've been presented with these objects that are impossible, and yet within the space they're entirely possible, entirely normal. One report, which I quote in the book, says it's like they were teaching me, like it's like they were teaching toddlers about triangles and squares and pentagons, um, these incredibly complex or high dimensional objects, geometric forms that were really simple and obvious to them, and made sense at the time to the individual. When they came out again, it was like, that was impossible. There's no way I should have been, that should have made any sense, because I was dealing with objects that one simply cannot imagine or perceive within in this kind of when we kind of drop back down into this lower dimensional state that we normally exist in.
Thank you for explaining that. I got one more question, then we'll go. I know Nuts, my co-host, has a couple questions for you. I thought were good. I don't know if Guy does, and then we'll go to the hands. But what you just described, I had a near-death experience. I was in a car accident, went through the windshield with my face. Um, I had no pulse when first responders arrived, and then for whatever reason, I was back, but I had this sense of returning home, similar to what you described. It was like, this place isn't real. I was finally back home. There was so much happiness and love. Um, then I guess I guess my heart started, my brain was working again, and I still had that strong feeling of looking forward to going back, and that this place wasn't I mean, it's real to an extent, but it was hard to explain. Like, we're here to learn something, but that is where we came from, and that's where we belong. But over time, that feeling kind of dissipated. Is that similar with what happens with people with DMT?
Yeah, I mean that sense of homecoming, that the place you go to, although it is incredibly bizarre and ostensibly entirely unfamiliar, does seem to be, it's like deja vu. It's like the very strong sense that you've been there before. And when it comes to NDEs, there has been a couple of studies. I mean, I know David Luke and Pascal Michael did a couple of studies, and they've looked at the overlaps between NDEs and DMT. And what you find actually is that the near death experience, in terms of its kind of characteristic qualities, looks almost like a mixture of DMT and 5-MeO DMT, which is entirely different. I mean, very structurally very similar molecule, 5-methoxydimethyltryptamine, but has a very different phenomenological profile to DMT. And the NDE sort of looks almost like, and it's plausible. You know, it's certainly not proven. I know people think that it's kind of, some people think that that it's a fact that when you're close to death, that your brain is flooded with DMT. It's certainly not proven. It's never been demonstrated in humans, but it's plausible that we know that DMT and 5-MeO DMT are endogenous. So it's plausible that during the near-death state, or the dying process, that the brain is flooded with potentially a mixture of DMT and 5-MeO DMT, and that there are no, if you take both of the characteristics of DMT and 5-MeO DMT, they cover all of the basic characteristics that you find in NDEs, which is kind of interesting. What that means, we don't know, but but yeah, I think not just NDEs, but other kind of anomalous experiences, abductions, um, sleep paralysis, and this kind of thing. There is, in both cases, in all of these cases, there is some sense of returning home to some kind of place where there is intelligence and life, but it's entirely different to this much lower dimensional kind of wet brain, wet bodied um, form that we normally exist within. So I don't know what that means. I don't necessarily believe that the DMT is kind of a glimpse of the afterlife or anything like that, but it's certainly interesting to think about how all of these things connect to each other.
Thank you, Andrew. Nuts. I know you had a couple questions. You wanna go?
Really, really briefly, Mav, how long were you out for estimate in terms of no pulse? Does anybody know?
I don't know. Um, there was a nurse who showed up on scene right when it happened. She checked on me and said I had no pulse. Then went over to my wife and was helping her. And then all of a sudden, I just assumed like afterwards that I woke up and the nurse and my wife were the ones that told me that no, I didn't have a pulse. And then then I was in extreme pain, and I was just like, "What the f?" Right? But and then I explained to my wife that like my experience. So yeah, I don't know how long it was. I just know it was just like I was driving, and then but I did encounter Jesus. So he was hugging me behind my car, and it was the most love I've ever felt in my life, and I felt like I was home. And then I woke up in tremendous pain because stupid me didn't have a seatbelt on. Decided to put my face through the windshield. Um, but yeah, I don't know how long, Boomer.
Thanks, Matt. I don't want to cut in front of the speakers. Just remind me to ask about hypoxia and carbon dioxide buildup when you guys get to me.
Yeah, that'll be
All right,
that'll be easy to remember, right, Mav?
I got it.
I'll remember it.
Thank you. First and foremost, thank you, Andrew, for being here. My first question is, if you could choose to live in the DMT world or here, what would you choose and why?
um, it's a difficult question. No, I don't think. I think you'd have to be pretty crazy to say I want to live in the DMT world, but that's just because um, I'm kind of happy in this world for the time being. I won't be here forever. None of us will. Um, I'm certainly not one of these people that I'm not Brian fucking Johnson who thinks that we're going to live forever within this kind of earthly incarnation or anything like that. I think that's kind of ridiculous. But um, I don't know. I don't necessarily think that our desires or the way we might want to live or exist would even make any sense beyond this world. I mean, people have tried to imagine what a perfect afterlife might be, and they've generally failed. I mean, if you look at descriptions of heaven in that Christians will tell you about, it's all it sounds fucking dull as ditch water. I mean, it's like Christ. You're gonna get bored of that. I'd rather go to the basement, thank you very much. It seems a lot more fun. So I don't think we when we're kind of embodied, we have certain drive, have certain impulses, we have certain desires, we have certain things we want that make sense in the here and now, right? We want to find a mate. We want to have sex. We want to eat. We want to kind of dance in the forest, all these kind of things that we want to do and how we want to exist that only make sense within this world, within this way of existing. And so to kind of translate that and say, oh, what kind of afterlife would I like? I don't know, but I certainly would not be in a rush to kind of permanently transport myself to the DMT world. I mean, it's for me is this very small, constrained earthly creature that it's a horrifying idea. It's too strange, it's too wild, it's too bizarre, and overwhelming. The idea that you want to spend all eternity in that kind of space. I'm not sure, I don't know, but I think once you've dispensed with your earthly form, if that's what happens, that might be a much more pleasing and ecstatic and beautiful way of existing. But I just don't think we can imagine. I just don't think that question, in a sense, is a good question, but I don't think it kind of makes any sense for me to answer it, because I just don't think we can imagine what we would like to experience. I mean, some people, if you think of the idea of merging with all reality or something, you know, complete oneness with everything, existing in pure, unadulterated bliss. It sounds good, but then if you imagine it as an earthly being, you think, oh God, actually, I'm not sure if I like that. I kind of like waking up in the morning and making coffee and, you know, walking around the neighborhood and seeing my children and my dog and that kind of thing, and kind of existing in pure unadulterated bliss, you know, weirdly and kind of ironically, it almost sounds like, oh, I'm not sure if I'd actually want that. So yeah, I don't think the question can be answered.
Thank you. My next one is: have you ever tried prayer or meditation while under DMT?
Um, no, I think prayer. No, I'm not really a praying kind of guy. Apart from when I go to the shrine, I will pray briefly. But so prayer, no. I think it's a good idea to you know, meditation prior to the experience, you know, to kind of settle the mind and focus. And, you know, if you want, if you have particular intentions, particular goals or purposes for your DMT trip, then spending some time, 5-10 minutes beforehand, I think that's always a good idea, to get yourself in the right mindset. But a lot of that really, you know, I think you would have to be quite well trained to kind of continue. You know, if you were continuing, you know, in a meditative upright sitting position, and maintaining that through the DMT trip, that would, I imagine, take some practice and experience. People kind of do that. I mean, that's kind of an 𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂 kind of vibe. People who are very, very experienced with these altered states of consciousness and can enter them much more in a much more controlled and regulated manner. But I think for most people, the advice would be, sure, do some quiet meditation before the experience, and then you have to just let go, because a lot of, you know, I often say that DMT seems almost kind of transcends the classical idea of set and setting, and that set and setting almost become irrelevant with after 10 seconds after you take that hit. It's like none of that matters anymore, and you simply have to let go. You know, learning to let go, and just go with it, because it's like you're sat on a roller coaster. You know, the big fat guy with a beard has clunked down that safety harness, and when he pushes the button, it's off, and there's nothing you can do. It doesn't matter how much you scream. It's like you're with it. You've got to go with it until the end, and that's kind of what DMT is like. And so, learning to let go, I think, and not fight it. I think that's the main danger with any psychedelic, really, but certainly with DMT, is trying to fight it or control it, because you won't be able to. So, yeah, sit quietly for 10 minutes and empty your mind as much as you can, and don't let go of expectations, let go of any sense that you're going to be directing this experience, and yeah, hold tight.
That's very interesting because that is why I'd be afraid to do it, because I would try to meditate, but I'd be like Ray Stantz from Ghostbusters up on top of the tower, and I'd be thinking of, you know, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man or something. Like I wouldn't be able to clear my mind, and that would be my fear that like right as I took the hit, I'd think it's something stupid. But
Well,
that's
it
just me.
won't. I mean, in a sense, it doesn't really matter, because it's going to. You know, as I said, it's like sitting on a roller coaster. You can do whatever you like, but it's taking you, and you're going. And that there certainly can be. There's more fear, I think, if you expect to be in control, or if you expect to see certain things, you expect to have certain experiences. You know, you read a lot of trip reports, and you think, this is what I'm going to see. You know, I'm going to pop into this dream world, and there's going to be little elves dancing around, and it's going to be all jolly and lovely, and it's going to be like a very beautiful, magical dream. And in fact, it completely seizes control of your neural machinery, and does what it likes with it. And that's, I think, the shocking thing, is expecting something, because whatever you expect or predict or anticipate, that ain't it.
Have you ever tried to manifest like deities or anything like such as like Jesus or Krishna and others? Any others?
No, no. I mean, again, I'm not of the mindset that one. I mean, some people do. For example, I know McKenna used to talk a lot about, calling the elves, um, and they would come kind of bounding in into the scene. And so, I don't think there's any harm in requesting, if you like, the presence of certain beings, but certainly don't expect your request to be fulfilled. I'll say it like that.
And thank you. And my final question is, with your experience of DMT, do you feel there is a higher chance of maintaining your consciousness in the afterlife?
I don't know. I mean, again, I try to avoid. I mean, one can speculate about these things, but I don't know what the afterlife is. So I don't know. I don't. Yeah, I don't know. Is the answer to that question? I know people have speculated on whether it might, dying before you die, as 𝗬𝗓𝗃𝗃 put it in his Immortality Key, and there might be some truth to that, and that you are getting a preview, kind of a pre-screening of what happens. But I certainly wouldn't assume that that's the case. I certainly wouldn't go in there with the assumption that you're getting access to the afterlife, because we don't know. We don't know what the afterlife is, and we don't know what the DMT world is. So I'd avoid making assumptions about that. Go in there without, let your assumptions and your presumptions fall away, because they're not going to be much use to you at all once you're in there.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Go ahead, Guy, if you got a question.
Yo, I had a question. I've been thinking about it. I've never done DMT. Like, I think the closest thing to DMT is just weed. But ever, like, in a trip or a journey, did you ever just think, oh shit, I'm tripping. It's okay. It's just DMT?
I think that's the short answer. Is no, in the sense that it's so fast that it's almost like there's no time to think. It's not like with other psychedelics. I mean, that's one of the reasons I think DMT is so is actually very safe, one could say. I mean, I use that term very guardedly. It is a shocking and astonishing experience. I don't want to underplay that, but it's so fast that you don't get a time to think. I mean, in my very first experience, as I said, more than 20 years ago, I lost any conception of ever being human. I mean, my entire humanity, my entire existence of a human being was obliterated, and I was just this. It was pure experience. I was just this focal perspective, experiencing this thing, and there wasn't a time. Wasn't until I started coming back and my kind of brain started to kind of piece together my humanity, that I kind of remembered that I was a human, that I'd taken this molecule. So that can be, I think, more important perhaps with DMTX, right, where you're extending the experience for much longer periods of time. But again, that's really for experienced people anyway. You might. Many people are able to kind of hold on, a thin thread back to their humanity, and recognize that they are, within the DMT world. But it's almost like the human world is no longer relevant. Your existence as a human being is no longer relevant within the DMT space, and so there's no need to kind of consider, why this experience is happening. But yeah, you will forget. You will lose complete touch with your existence as a human, and that in itself can be very, very confusing. and disorientating, because suddenly you're in this entirely unfamiliar space, and it's like, what's happened? How did I get here? And that's even worse. I say worse as if it's a bad thing, but with something like 𝗬𝗓, where there's kind of an existential absoluteness to the experience, in that you've always been there and always will be. That very profound sense of that with salvia, I think I don't recommend anyone play around with that. It's this real feeling that this incredibly strange alternate reality is the only thing that's ever existed, and you've always been there, and you always will be. There's no entrance and there's no exit. It's like that is it forever, and it might feel like forever that you are there until finally. It's only a few minutes in the kind of the normal waking world, but you're kind of it's only when you're kind of dragged back that you kind of remember what's going on. So these things, these kind of experiences, yeah, they can be very jolting psychologically. I think that's the true danger with these things, is that they completely obliterate any sense of humanity very, very efficiently and very, very rapidly and absolutely and completely. And that is shocking and confusing for many people. So yeah, these are not party drugs.
Mav, I actually, my question was about 𝗬𝗓. Would you mind if I just jumped in to ask him real quick since he's talking about it?
Sure.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it. So what you said about unlocking the dimensions, I thought was super interesting, because the DMT for people, well, first of all, like you said, when you're in these unlocking these extra dimensions, it's hard. Just like right now, I don't think anybody could really understand what it's like to live in 4 dimensions or to live in 2 dimensions. Once you cross over into the other dimensions, like, you can't really recall what it was like to be in the previous one, like our normal one we're in right now. So I agree 100%. That clicked in my brain. With the DMT experiences, it seems almost more like you're unlocking a higher dimension, which is like expansive. And the 𝗬𝗓, what I've heard and how I experience it, is that you're almost dropping down into a lower dimension. You're feeling compressed or trapped. But it's still, you still experience a weird intelligence, and it's in a different form, and it's a much more compressive and oppressive and scary type of situation, but there's still an intelligence there. In your opinion, do you think that EEGs and like more scientific studies of the brain mapping during these experiences would even benefit, or is it something that is so almost spiritual, I don't want to even use that word, but so non-physical that the scientific studies might not be helpful? If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think, first of all, I should clarify, when I use this term dimensions, people have these kind of misunderstandings of what I mean. There's nothing, people talk about interdimensional aliens and things like this. I mean dimension in a very specific and quite scientific sense, right? If you take a system and you excite it, right? Let's say you take a molecule, for example, and that's vibrating, and if you heat up that molecule, you can start to see modes of vibration in different dimensions. So you open up degrees of freedom within the molecule, and it starts to move in different ways. And effectively, you've increased the dimensionality of the molecular dynamics, and with many other systems as well. When they're in a kind of a low energy state, they have there's a certain dimensionality to their dynamics, and when you excite that state, some kind of energy parameter is increased, then you can open up dynamics that didn't exist, and so you kind of increase the dimensionality of the dynamics. And this is true with many types of complex systems, and the brain is a complex system. So that's what I mean by dimensionality. And DMT is, like all psychedelics, they are kind of exciting certain populations of neurons within the brain, and this opens up dynamics that aren't available in the normal waking state. And I think DMT is doing the same. Now, the problem is as I said, the brain is a complex system, right? It's a dynamical complex system, in the technical sense, in that its behavior, its dynamic emerges from the interactions of vast numbers, millions of neurons with billions or even trillions of connection patterns. And so predicting, how will this complex system behave when we stimulate this particular subpopulation of neurons, you can't do. It's very difficult to do with any complex system to make predictions. You can observe it, and you can measure and look at the dynamics, but it's very difficult to predict how a complex system is going to behave when you alter certain parameters, and that's a basic feature of complex systems. And so when we look at DMT, you're stimulating a certain repertoire of receptors to certain degrees, and you are introducing certain patterns of stimulation, certain patterns of inhibition, and this causes this entirely new dynamical behavior to emerge with different degrees of freedom, and this experience is a high dimensional state. Now, when you take another molecule, let's say 𝗬𝗓 salvinorin from 𝗬𝗓, then you have an entirely different receptor binding profile in different parts of the brain, and that is perturbing this complex system in an entirely different manner. And so the emergent behaviors are also entirely different. And that applies with all drugs. All drugs are perturbing the brain, or all psychoactive drugs are perturbing the brain their own unique way, depending on the pattern of receptor binding in different parts of the brain. Shulgin used to describe this as like an orchestra. The sound of the orchestra emerges from all of these different instruments and how you play them, where certain ones are quiet, certain ones are loud, and the dynamics of all these different instruments playing at the same time creates this unique ambiance to the sound. And in the same way, molecules are doing the same thing. You're throwing this molecule, inserting this molecule into the brain, and kind of in this highly complex system, and seeing what happens. And so with salvinorin, you've got something that is that's completely unlike the classic psychedelics in terms it doesn't act via this particular subset of serotonin receptors, but is actually working via an entirely different neuromodulator system in an entirely different part of the brain. And thus you get entirely different emergent activity, which happens to be extremely strange and unlike that of any other psychedelic. Why does it appear, as you described, as lower dimensional? People describe themselves as almost like a ribbon-like, as if they're squashed into this. The entire reality is squashed into this two-dimensional ribbon. I'm not sure if it's actually two-dimensional or whether it's a two-dimensional. It's a much more complex, high-dimensional topology, but you're on kind of a two-dimensional plane, if that kind of makes sense. So the dynamics, I think, are. I don't think it's necessarily correct to say that we're dropping down as such, but it certainly can feel like that, as if you have the dynamics have somehow emerged that you're sat on a lower dimensional plane of a higher dimensional object, like being on the surface of a Mobius strip. Right, it's actually a two-dimensional surface, and yet it's more complex than that if you look at it. And in the same way, I think it's that kind of thing that is happening with salvia. It's still very strange. It's not really just like going into a 2D world. It's an incredibly complex and strange experience, but it does have this entirely different dynamics and entirely different dimensionality that again just comes from what's going on at the receptor level and how this feeds up through this emergent behavior, this emergent activity of the cortex. And when you take neuroimaging, you asked about can we study this using neuroimaging? The answer is yes, but there is limitations because we can't look at every single neuron and every single connection and try to in real time and say, what's actually going on here and kind of model this in a computer. You can look at more coarse-grained models and say, what kinds of behaviors are we seeing? But again, this is going to be very low-dimensional. You're not going to get too much information. The only way to really understand, what salvia is like is not by looking at neuroimaging scans, but is by taking salvia. And the same applies with DMT, I think. You can look for certain patterns. You can look for conditions of high entropy versus low entropy, high complexity versus low complexity. You can look at differences of connectivity between different cortical regions. This is all the wheelhouse of people like 𝗓𝗏 and Robin Carhart-Harris and others, is looking at how global changes in neural activity and the dynamics and the structure of neural activity, how that changes over time. And that's very useful and very important, and that can certainly inform what's going on and the type of experiences that people have. But you're not going to see entities popping up on the screen. You're not going to get really a complete picture. You're going to get very, very coarse-grained slice of what's going on in the brain. But in DMT, it's very much a first-person subjective experience, of course, and so that's the only way to really understand what's going on.
Wow, that was interesting. We're gonna go to Doomer, then we're gonna go to Goose, and then Aaron, then Neo.
Mav, I have a ton of questions, and there were other people ahead of me. It might make more sense for me to put me in order because there might be pitchforks otherwise.
Yeah, no problem. I just knew you were excited about this interview. I didn't want you to miss out. Go ahead, Goose.
So okay. Okay. So you're talking about salvia. How close are those two? How are they related? Are they on the same scale? Are they,
Different
do they
dimension.
give you the same type of different dimension? Gotcha.
Sorry, that
Okay.
was me. I shouldn't be
So,
answering for Andrew,
my,
Goose. Go ahead, Andrew. Forgive me, man.
Well, I mean, they are. I mean, molecularly, they're very, very different. I mean, they're completely different families of molecules. So the DMT is an alkaloid. It's constructed from the amino acid tryptophan. It's a tryptamine, dimethyltryptamine, as is 5-MeO DMT, as is psilocybin and psilocin, and LSD is even very closely related, although more complex. But 𝗬𝗏 is a completely different family of molecules called terpenes, which have a completely different biochemical origin, and in terms of the way that they interact with the brain is also completely different. So salvia is a complete freak in terms of, in many ways, it's molecularly it's a complete freak, and it doesn't look like any other psychedelic. And there's no way if someone looked at that molecule, they would go, "Oh, this is probably psychedelic" at all. Or even if they looked at its receptor binding profile, they wouldn't think it was psychedelic until you actually put it in someone's brain and experience it. And the salvia, I would say, is in many ways, I think DMT is easier to handle than high dose, certainly high dose, pure 𝗬𝗏 from salvia divinorum. I'm not talking about just the leaf,
that
but the actual.
that kind of was my question, because I have done salvia in the past on purpose once and accidentally. The one I did accidentally, that one fucked me up, bro. I was not ready for that shit. But one of my biggest concerns is like tripping out so much that you end up causing harm to yourself or others just because the trip is that powerful, right? I've seen people on salvia kind of snap. When I was on salvia, it felt like somebody was standing behind me and had their hands on my shoulders and was pulling me back, and it was just, and everything just, and I was just laughing for no reason. Like I was just laughing, right? And I'm just like, dude, if I would have gotten, um, I was just kind of scared to hurt somebody just because of me tripping out, right? Is that kind of the same way with DMT? I know you've been talking about it, how it's quicker, how it's faster, how it's a completely different chemical compound. But what have you seen, or what can you expect from trying it or from doing it? And then the other thing is, it's just like, what it would be a safe amount to start with.
Okay, so I mean, the thing with salvia is that obviously it was, for a long time, it was this legal high, right? It was sold openly and freely, and people were buying these 5x, 10x, 20x, 100x concentrations, extracts of salvia, and thinking it was going to be so completely inexperienced people who just thought that this was going to be, it was legal and therefore it was, going to be fun or whatever, and they simply weren't prepared. And with salvia, certainly there are many. You can find videos of people taking, idiots, basically taking, high doses of salvia and doing crazy things, climbing out the window and stuff, and just literally becoming insane for a few minutes. And I think that is a real,
Right.
yeah, that's a real danger.
Punching through windows, bro.
Yeah.
Like, if you punch through a window, you might slice a
Oh
vein
God, yeah,
open. You know
yeah,
what I mean? Like that's kind of, or if somebody's like trying to restrain you and you just kind of like just overpower them, not like actually beat them, but like
yeah.
you're like dragging them, or you're like, or you push them into a wall or a corner or something, right? Like that's kind of more of my concern is is a bad trip versus actually like doing the DMT. I learned my lesson. We were those stupid kids that were kind of experimenting with it. We did go to like a smoke shop and they had like a
Yeah, yeah.
50X, and the guy was like, yeah, it's this new high.
Mhm.
And we were like, oh, cool. Let's try. That motherfucker did not prepare us. We were not ready, bro. We were not ready. My friend was like, I'll take the biggest hit. Dude, he smoked that shit out of a bong, dude. I was like, I'm terrified. I am terrified, right? So I was probably like a bad initial experience, but, I'm just kind of glad that I get to pick and poke your brain because I'm still curious about it. I still see a lot of benefit. Like, and I'm talking about the DMT. I'm not really talking about the salvia, but I see there's like a lot of beneficial, um, just parts to it. Now, I don't want to say just like mentally. I'm sure like spiritually. I'm sure like, um, giving you new ways to think about things or new ways to see things. Maybe resetting you to a certain degree. And I just think DMT is like the waiting room to like the next step.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, the kind of issues you described with people becoming violent or becoming uncontrollable or doing weird, that seems to be very much a salvia kind of thing. I think it's almost, obviously you should have someone, certainly if it's your first time with DMT, you should certainly have someone there with you. But I've never, I can't even think of a single case where someone has become, violent or enraged or trying to harm themselves or others under DMT. Most people, 99% of the time or more, when someone takes DMT and you watch them, they'll be laid back and their eyes will be closed and it will be as if they're asleep. They might be breathing heavily, they might be uttering the odd few words or so, but generally it's very quiet, and certainly they're not they're not going wild, they're not flailing, they're not trying to run out the front door or anything like that. That seems to be something that is not exclusive to salvia. I mean, you see it with deliriants as well. The tropane alkaloids, that kind of behavior that can become extremely dangerous. But with DMT, no, it doesn't seem to be an issue. You shouldn't be concerned that you're going to murder your roommate or anything like that. That just doesn't seem to be a component of DMT.
And for 𝗬𝗏, I feel like it
And it's
was
more like of a,
like I said before, it was a compressive feeling, like the opposite. Where DMT, I feel like you're open. 𝗬𝗏, I feel like I've done it a couple times, and you always feel like you're compressed or trapped, like you're being pressured, which is just, I don't know. That's my experience.
Yeah, and that can certainly increase the sense of
yeah,
wanting
and
to escape, and to fight it. But that doesn't seem to happen with DMT.
yeah, that's what I was getting at. It's not that it makes you enraged. It's not that it makes you want to hurt people. It's like you're in such a panic state that you're in a like flight situation, and you'll do like pretty much anything to like kind of satisfy that feeling, right? So you'll like run, you'll break, you'll jump through windows, you'll whatever it is you deem. So that's a salvia thing.
Yeah,
That's not a
that's a
DMT thing.
salvia thing for sure.
Okay. Oh, dude, that's so like, I thought that was like any type of hallucinogen. I thought that was like a result of it and that you needed to be babysat and that you needed to, um, just because of if you got so panicked that you might jump out of a window or something, right? To try to get away and try to satisfy that flight,
No,
feeling.
no, that I never see or even hear of that happening. The biggest danger used to be people dropping the pipe and burning themselves, um, because they lose control of their body and then they forget they have a body. So no. Short answer is you don't really need to be concerned about that kind of thing.
Okay. I have more questions, but I'm gonna let everybody else go. Put me back in rotation, Mav.
Thank you, Goose. Go ahead, Aaron. You're up next.
Yeah, thanks, Mav. And thanks, Andrew, for coming and just sharing your experiences. I think this is, especially in the last like 10 years or so. I mean, ayahuasca retreats have become a pretty common thing, you know, and that there's a whole industry of charlatanry in there as well, but that's a whole other dynamic. But the point is, it's more in the Overton window and the collective experience. And you know, even Matt being Catholic and other, you know, religious dynamics, everyone's curious because I do think the way you're describing it makes sense to me. It's more of a technology. And I think with it's more of a, like I said, it is endogenous. It is created in the body, although we're putting it in endogenously from an exterior source. I personally, I spent the first 33 years of my life pretty much sober and figuring out how to really love life and figure out all the ups and downs of life and enjoy life and have a solid like anchoring in my psychology. And I spent several years kind of studying psychedelics, the different dynamics, and felt a draw to them. And so, but probably about 7 years ago, I started diving into psychedelics, actually engaging them. And since then, I've probably done DMT about 100 times. Part of those experiences for me was the most common experience people know of is like the blast off experience. It's typically about 3 hits and you're gone. Where consciously, if someone's watching your experience, you're not present. But a lot of times, like Andrew was saying, you're just kind of, your eyes are closed, you're in the state 5, 10, 15 minutes is a pretty common experience. And then you start to land or come back and kind of have conscious memories, maybe some kind of recall. You're trying to formulate, you know, words or articulation or some kind of analogy or metaphor for the experience because it is a multi-dimension, totally different topology, geography. Like everybody experienced it a little different. And I think part of, for me, with a lot of psychedelics and mind altering substances is not just like the most extreme experience, but the whole spectrum. So what happens when you just take one hit DMT and let it settle out, or two, or a couple, or, you know, so there's a lot of dynamics that where you feel like the water table of your psychology or your awareness start to rise and you can consciously engage it more. I think a lot of the resistance too that Andrew was talking about, being able to like commit to the experience, and it is kind of like that. A lot of psychedelics, LSD, mushrooms, whatever. You know, you take it, you ingest it, you start to go through some maybe cognitive freak out in some way or another, and you can remind yourself, this will be over in a few hours. It's okay. There's a good chance, there's a high probability I will be coming back to this version of me, you know, that I'm not going to get lost or go crazy or lobotomized or whatever when I come back. And so there is like a psychological awareness, but a lot of the breakthrough dynamics, I think that people have a hard time being able to break through the default mode network. It's the monkey mind that's resisting everything, you know, the constructs of your awareness of like reality and how it works is starting to, you're being pushed beyond that. You're being pushed into a multidimensional awareness. And if you're resisting, you're fighting, your mind is fighting that, it's going to cause much more seemingly traumatic experience because there's resistance in the circuit, if you will. So you've like amped up the voltage in your circuit. And if your mind is fighting it, saying no, 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 but if you can actually find some kind of coherence with the experience, you can enter into the experience in a way that there's, I think, a more holistic dynamic involved. And I have, I took a bunch of different notes. One of the experiences, well, let's say, okay, there's one of the experiences I'll share that on DMT with the dimensional dynamic. I was at a bonfire at a friend's house, and he had DMT, and we were talking about the dynamic and decided to go in. He was playing the flute, which created this awesome, again, like a multidimensional awareness. When you have music and psychedelic experiences, it can create a space or a set and setting that can kind of carry the experience in certain ways. And I remember it being awful, probably the most traumatic, intense, painful, bad trip experience I've had in my entire life. It was tormenting. It was painful. Coming back to my body was like it just felt awful. It felt like shoving down parts of me into this thing that wasn't fitting right. And I remember having this encounter with like a lineage demon entity thing and having this dynamic and allowing it to transmute in the fire and all this stuff. But I remember at that point too, like, because a lot of times when I've done DMT, it's been rounds. So if you blast off, typically it's out of your system 10, 15 minutes, give or take. If you settle back down, you can then hit it again and have an additional experience. And what I found most of the times is your second time going in, now your psychologist is a little more prepared, knows the kind of roller coaster ride it's going to go on. It's able to resist less and just kind of engage the experience. And so I remember that moment. I just remember, like, if I don't do DMT again right now, I will never, ever do it again, because that was terrible. And so I did. And I found myself laying down in the dirt, looking into the fire, and I was experiencing this like multidimensional waters. I realized I was back in the womb. There's all this geometry. There were voices of people I was going to meet in this life that I'd already met, that I haven't met yet. Like, I was engaging with all like the timelines of my life. It was very palpable, but it was very safe, like being safe in the womb. And I was looking into the fire, and I remember seeing this like portal, like that I was going through as this experience was ending. And it was actually my first experience. And it was really birth trauma, me being born into this life. Like, they had to break my collarbone coming out. They had to use forceps. There's a bunch of different stuff. But I realized in that moment, I went from what I experienced first was the trauma of being born. If I didn't do the experience again, I never would have experienced the beauty prior to birth going in. And so like there's a lot of it. I'm sure Andrew has too. Like there's so many different ways that you can have different experiences. And on the dimensionality, when I came in initially, Andrew was talking about like one of the times I had just gone to visit Serpent Mound in Ohio, which lines up with Constellation Draco. And I'd physically been on site. And there's a concept of soul codes or different things. Like when we connect to different nodes on the planet, there's some kind of codes that you can carry on other dimensions or levels. I was aware of that concept, and I did DMT in a bathtub. Water amplifies things, and what I saw in the 3D realm was this geometry shifting in front of me, and I felt like I just knew it. You have additional awarenesses in these dynamics. It was these Anunnaki beings pushing through like into this dimension, and they were up in my face, intimidating me, trying to take these soul codes. And I remember just feeling very affronted, like, get out of my space. Like, this is rude. There's still decorum on dimensional levels, and you didn't ask to get this close to me. And so they're trying to distract me being in my face while they were sticking this tentacle down in me to like extract these soul codes. And so I remember looking them in the eye, realizing what they're doing, grab the tentacle and start to backfeed it into their system. It's like, well, if you're going to violate my system, I have now legal access to go back into your system. And they just bounced out. They just left when they realized I was able to backfeed into it. So there's a lot of, anyway, those are just two anecdotal examples, but there's a lot of dimensionality I think exists. And one of my ayahuasca experiences, part of what became very clear to me is that the things that have previously been ineffable, unable to be articulated or explained, that we're in the area or in the era to F them, if you will, to find ways to articulate and find ways to bridge the gap between what's going on and all these additional realms that are happening to us all the time. Our physiology or technology or, chemical biology isn't necessarily just tuned into them, but they are happening, and it can be a long process thing to integrate these multisensorial experiences into something that you can still function healthily. And so for me personally, the first 33 years of my life being sober and learning how to live life soberly and how to handle my psychology soberly has been a major anchor for these massive psychedelic experiences, that I'm not like lost or I come back and everything's ruined, or I'm, like I've been able to bring it back in and just over time process that into my everyday reality. So anyway, I don't know if any of that triggers something for you, Andrew, or something you'd want to speak on there, but I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on those things.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. I mean, yes, everyone's going to have a different experience. You can't. It's not possible, I think, to. It is possible to kind of describe a kind of an archetypal base kind of DMT experience and the kind of things you might expect. But again, as you described, even two successive trips can be entirely different to each other, and so going in with specific expectations, I think, about what you're going to experience, I think is probably a bad idea, because you simply don't know. And as you explained, one experience is going to be entirely different, both in terms of its valence, whether it's a positive or negative experience, or its structure and how it relates to you personally. I mean, we are all kind of individual beings, and we all, we're creatures of interaction. We interact with other humans. We interact with our environment. We interact with our memories and our experiences, and it's the same in the DMT space. You're entering into some kind of interaction with the with this space. It's not simply an observation. It's not like watching a movie. You are entering into, you are interfacing, if you like, with this thing, whatever it is, this intelligence, this space, this hidden structure, whatever it is, and everyone will interact with that in the same way. So I think that's kind of an important kind of message, is that it's not simply you're not simply being granted. It's not like someone's just sliding the shutter down and allowing you to kind of see through a window into this other world that's kind of going on. You become part of it in a sense. You temporarily become a DMT entity in a sense. You become part of that reality, and you take a lot of you with you. You might not remember that, but it's you that's going in there in a sense. Whatever you are, is going into and having some kind of interaction with that space, just as like it would be in the normal waking world. If you go to a party, your experience is going to be completely different to someone else's, depending on whether you're in a good mood or a bad mood, whether you're shy or whether you're more gregarious, who you know and who you don't know, how familiar or unfamiliar the environment is. All these kind of things you take into into a party, and so even two people that are in 100 people in exactly the same space, they're all going to describe completely different experiences. Some will say it was boring, and all the people were mean, and I didn't know anyone, and I just wanted to go home. And the next person will say, this was the best party I've ever been to in my entire life. It was so much fun. Everyone was so interesting, all this kind of stuff. And it's like, did you go to the same fucking party? And it's like, yeah, I saw you there, and it's like that. So even if you are going to the same, so quote unquote space, how you interact with it is going to determine what you what you take out of it, and how you describe it.
Thanks for that question, Aaron. We're going to go to Doomer, Neo, Groove, and then Bruce.
I just need to say I'm top of the hour. I have a hard leave, so got 24 minutes. So try to keep your questions as brief to get as many people as possible. So please don't, no 20-minute monologues.
No 20 minutes, please. Mav, Goose. Hey, did you say I'm next? I don't want to jump ahead of anyone.
Yeah, go ahead, Doomer.
Mav, Goose, Nuts. Nuts, Goose. Thanks for hosting the space. Andrew, I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. I've been waiting for Mav to trap the genie in the bottle. So I'm very grateful you're here in the spaces. Huge fan of your work. Done 3 ayahuasca ceremonies, 20 to 30 full breakthroughs on DMT, all of which I hypothetically extracted in a fully legal context outside of the United States.
We got it.
And I want to start. I'm hoping we can do some rapid fire stuff. I want everybody to get their questions in to the top of the hour, if that's cool with you. Rapid fire stuff. Rick Strassman. I can pull it up. I can't remember the exact dosage, but my understanding is that for DMTX at the peak state, it's not fully the Strassman dose. Is that correct, or am I mistaken?
Sorry, what's not the Strassman dose? Oh, DMTX.
The concentration, the intravenous concentration.
So DMTX, you have complete control. So we know. So Strassman's highest dose is the standard of the 4 doses is 0.4 milligrams per kilogram. Obviously, when you've got an infusion, that really doesn't apply. You have an initial bolus of about 0.4 mg per kilogram, which kind of breaks you into the space, and then you have an infusion rate that you can regulate, that can hold you in a breakthrough state. But you can go high, you can go lower. So there's no standard. So at 𝗓𝗓𝗃, for example, in the Caribbean, the company I work with, they have a number of protocols that they dial in, so they can dial in your experience, and so you can be held at a relatively mild state, even sub-breakthrough if you want, where you're still aware of your surroundings, or you can push them deeper in, and you can control that in real time. So you can adjust it. So the short answer is with DMTX is there is no kind of standard level. You
Oh,
can,
that's
and that's
awesome.
the beauty of DMTX, is that you can regulate the depth of the experience and adjust it in real time.
That's awesome. Are you finding, obviously it's not, even if you do milligram per kilogram, it's not going to be the same experience for every person depending on their experience and their physiology, but are you finding a new phenomenology under different concentrations? When we're talking about peak doses, is there like a threshold?
Well, there's certainly a threshold, yeah. I mean, what Strassman found out, from our modeling work that I did with Strassman when we developed the DMTX, we looked at kind of what is the brain concentration of DMT that allows you that transition to take place, and that's expected in terms of how complex systems work. Is that you get this, as I said, you get this initial more fluid and dynamic state, and then it collapses into a completely different type of behavior. That's very common in complex systems. They will transition between two completely different,
Something
entirely
emergent,
stable state,
right?
right? And there is a
Yeah.
transition state as well, which is a bit more disorganized. And so certainly, yes, there is a difference. But people will experience entities, and at least the sense of interacting with entities, even at sub-breakthrough doses. But if you want complete dissolution of the normal waking world, then you have to kind of push beyond. It's not a hard threshold, and it does vary depending on the individual, which is why it needs to be dialed in on an individual level. So there's not like one DMTX
It's not
protocol.
hard. Yeah, it's
You
not
know,
hard and fast, but we're talking
right.
like 0.3, 0.4 in that realm is
So
normally when we're talking full breakthrough.
yeah, that's what Strassman found. I mean, some people, had a full breakthrough experience at 0.2 milligrams per kilogram, and some had quite profound experiences at 0.1. So it depends on the individual, but it's very hard to predict. You can't do it by age or body weight or sex. It's like quite unpredictable, which is why you need to it needs to be dialed in individually. So your first DMTX session, for example, at 𝗓𝗓𝗃, will be kind of a dialing in initially to kind of get the parameters right so that you can be stably held within the space at the level that you want.
In those, and what do you call that phase? You call it dissolution when like fully broken through. When we're talking in states of dissolution, any experiences of like shamanic phlegm, people pulling out, some sort of shamanic phlegm, or bodily possession or takeover?
Not in the DMT sessions that I'm aware of. I mean, these kind of things, they tend to be associated more with ayahuasca sessions, but with DMTX and with DMT generally, people are generally their mind, will be, there's a sense of their brain has been seized control of, but generally
Yeah.
they will be quiet and relaxed.
What
during
about
the
in
state.
the transition phase? Has anything like that ever happened where there seemed to be some sort of motor kinesthetic takeover?
Well, I mean, the transitions phase tends to be a little more agitated sometimes as people adjust to the state, depending on the level of experience. But nothing. I mean, there are some in Death by Astonishment. I described some quite dramatic. One particularly dramatic example of someone entering an extremely violent state. Well, not violent as such, but what appeared to be a state of kind of physiological state of shock that almost killed him, really. I mean, his heart rate and his blood pressure plummeted, and Strassman had to intervene. Um, but these kind of things are very, very rare for the most
They are
people. Yeah,
they
very
are
rare.
rare, yeah.
Yeah.
But no moment. I guess what I'm saying is you haven't ever for intravenous DMT. You haven't ever witnessed in any subjects in the transition phases, either going in or coming out, of something else taking over or moving the body.
No.
Um, the the silence to me on the discussion of disclosure, UFO phenomena, the relative silence, almost it feels like complete silence from pioneers, and it's less justified for yourself, but in general, we saw an uptick in, let's just say, transparency, or at least in reporting. We saw an uptick in public reporting of the UFO phenomenon, almost coinciding with the psychedelic renaissance. Right around 2017, Michael Pollan's book, Tim Ferriss is interviewing everyone and their mama, from Fadiman to Stanislav Grof. Uh, I assume you've been on the Tim Ferriss show. Like,
No.
we have these two events that are happening at the same time, and then of course you have McKenna talking about the signs of a singularity happening culturally in a civilization that we all see mirrored. We now have also the emergence of what might be the threshold of AI and AGI. If you, because you're very careful, you're very responsible as a scientist, but if you didn't have to be politically and scientifically conservative, what the fuck do you think is going on right now in the world?
I don't think I'm scientifically conservative either, at all,
Well,
to be
you're very
honest.
responsible, but I'm dying to hear from you, from Stamets, from Danny Goler. Like, well, Danny Goler is very vocal, but from the
Just to
traditional
say the bloody
psychedelic
least,
people,
yeah.
what is going on here, and what do you think is the connection?
Um, I don't know. I think we're kind of entering this weird phase of our. I think humans. We all technological civilizations, I guess, pass through a number of different phases, and that's perfectly natural. And we kind of we became, in a sense, stagnated in the technological age, the industrial age and the technological age, the information age, and we became very, very cemented within this um, delusion, really, that we had it all worked out. Newton came along and sorted out planetary motion and physics, and then Einstein came along, completely revolutionized that. But then he kind of, that's then quantum mechanics and Fermi and Planck and all of that kind of stuff, and we reached this phase, I think, where of we became very, very sure of ourselves, and that we were able to kind of grok the universe and reality, and we knew what was what, and we knew where the universe came from. And if you think about, in the late 90s and early 2000s, all the celebrities, it was Hawking and Brian Greene and Lawrence Krauss. These were the gods. These are the people that you turned to, that told you about what was what and what was not what, right? Neil deGrasse Tyson. I wouldn't say any more about him, but these were the
You
kind of
can
the
dunk on him as
gods
much as
of
you
the
like,
modern
Andrew.
age, right? These are the people that were able to tell you, and Dawkins, of course. There was and Hitchens. I love Hitchens, but for different reasons. And they had it all worked out. We just had to reject all of the delusions of the past, the primitive mystical thinking of the past, and forget about that, because now we're living with this cold, dark universe that has no intrinsic meaning, and we know, we emerged from nothing, and we know exactly when that happened, 14.73 billion years ago or whatever, and we know exactly how reality is constructed. We know exactly how we evolve. All of this stuff, and a lot of it, a lot of that is good, solid science, and a lot of that's true. But it did create in us a kind of a sense of an inflated sense of understanding. But then I think it's almost like we're collectively, many of us at least, are kind of transitioning out of that phase, and there's the shift now, not going back to a more primitive way of thinking, but kind of taking the messages that we've forgotten, ideas about consciousness, ideas about non-human intelligence, the spiritual traditions going back thousands of years. Whether it's Buddhism or Hinduism or whatever, the idea of this vast intelligence network, we're kind of taking that and reframing it in the 21st century. And I think that's the shift. The idea now, it's no longer crazy to suggest that there are other intelligences scattered across the universe. And next, it's going to be no longer crazy to say that there are other intelligences that are completely non-physical, and that we don't really have a handle on the true nature of reality. And nature is getting weirder and weirder. Terence McKenna always used to say it's going to get weirder and weirder, and it is getting weirder and weirder. And it's like it almost seems chaotic now, and that it's hard to get a handle on what's going on. But it feels like this is a natural progression. You're seeing all of this UAP stuff kind of blowing up, and psychedelics, as you say, we're in this renaissance now, and with DMT in particular, I think is very, very essential to that, because it introduces the idea of some kind of an intelligence of a form that we've never considered. We're not talking about little grey beings anymore. Some people are, of course, but people are starting more and more. People like John Mack, he was central as well, are starting to think about intelligences that don't exist in the kind of the form that we assumed they might. And that all has this line that goes all the way back to mystical and religious traditions from, the Amazonian rainforests or whatever, or, Near Eastern and Far Eastern and Middle Eastern and, ancient traditions about, spirits and gods. They're talking about the same thing, in my opinion. They're talking about some kind of other intelligence. So that's what I think is going on. We're shifting out of this illusory phase, if you like, of assuming that we have got a kind of handle on reality, and entering the new phase, and that is always turbulent, as you're transitioning between these two phases. So that's what I think is going on.
Really final last quick question. When it
Very
comes
quick.
to
10
very
minutes.
quick, when it comes to DMTX,
Yeah.
What would it take to convince you to do a 168-hour study? If it could be done safely physiologically, would you be willing to do it? Even if the results
168 hours.
a week, yeah.
Oh. Well, I mean, I've written about it. I've written about in Reality Switch Technologies in the final chapter. I talk about the extension, and I've presented about it. But you have to take into account, I mean, physiologically, it might be possible. It's not something I'm going to be doing, but you would have to take care of waste management and bodily needs. There's a whole entire
But it's not impossible.
things that need to be taken into account. Once you get beyond a few hours, basically, there's a lot of things you need to consider. So nobody's going to get permission to do a week-long study anytime soon.
I agree. Yeah. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Okay.
I really appreciate it.
Okay.
We're going to go to Neo, and we're going to go to Bruce. We only got 9 minutes.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for the space. I love it. I have a question basically about the evolutionary aspect of DMT. Like, there's this mechanism going on, and just biology wouldn't do something if it wouldn't be useful. So I guess like the question is, we have like this DMT all the time, and also like there's this a practice apparently where slaves had their pineal gland being damaged, so that they are like a little bit more obedient in a way. But like to have this DMT flooding like in the moment of death, like there has to be like a mechanism that is evolutionary, like kind of useful. And I also have another theory about it. If we are kind of engineered by Anunnaki and stuff like that, would that be something to maybe I'm not sure, like that is being used like in a way against us. It's I want to hear what you think about these theories. Thank
Well,
you.
I mean, in terms of evolution, yes. I mean, I think DMT has some kind of function in the brain, and I think first of all, the pineal, we know that the pineal is probably almost certainly not the major source of DMT. We know that certainly in rodents, we know that if you remove the pineal, the levels of DMT are not affected. But we do know also that DMT levels rise rapidly in the brains of rats when you stop their hearts, basically, suggesting that DMT has a neuroprotective role under hypoxic conditions, which of course occurs during the dying process. The brain becomes starved of oxygen, and DMT protects the brain under these hypoxic conditions, and that would explain its kind of physiological function. And again, that's not affected by the pineal gland. So I don't buy into all this mystical kind of pineal stuff, but that doesn't explain the actual experience, in terms of what's the evolutionary purpose of going to another world and experience. That is a mystery. We don't know. In my first paper I wrote on DMT back in 2012 called Building Alien Worlds. If people want to read that, it's on my website, alieninsect.net, and you can read about, I had this kind of loose evolutionary hypothesis, which I won't go into now. People can read about that. I don't necessarily subscribe to it anymore, but it was an idea back then, many years ago. So yeah, there's clearly evolutionary function physiologically. What the evolutionary function is of the actual altered state of consciousness, or why that would occur, I think that's still a complete mystery. And the Anunnaki thing, well, I mean, you can one can have as many hypotheses and ideas as one wants, and they might hang together, but my question is how you're going to test that hypothesis. And so I generally avoid these kind of things as much as possible, because it's like you can describe anything, you can say anything. DMT is implanted by the simulators as a piece of code or something, or DMT allows you access to the simulation and all that kind of stuff that's going on now. People talking about that. I think I tend to stay away from it, but simply because it's like anything goes, basically, and you become detached from any kind of scientific rationality, and you're just into theorizing and speculating, and it's good for science fiction books, but it's not very helpful or useful for me. Okay, next.
Go ahead, Bruce.
Thank you. Pleasure to speak to you, Andrew, and appreciate your work. I'll make it quick. I'll contract it, so I know you haven't got long. In your book, you give validity to the hypothesis that DMT might enable non-human intelligences to take control of the world-building architecture in the brain. I wonder, with that, for you to further that line of research in particular, is that limited to looking at phenomenology and the experiences people have, or do you see ways of looking at the way DMT interacts with the brain and the way the brain allows that experience to happen? Could there be something in the direct analysis of the DMT unfolding and which parts of the brain are involved that would give you a clue to whether something was taking control, and why would need DMT to work in that way? I mean, is there ways to further that hypothesis to say that would strengthen the idea that this is potentially a hack of some sort?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I think the short answer is yes, there could be ways. I know that. So you can look at. So there are ways of analyzing the dynamics of a complex system to see whether you're seeing kind of emergent behaviors, whether there's kind of information or dynamics that the system is displaying that suggest some other input rather than the usual kind of input. Whether there's some extra, if there's some kind of additional informational signature that cannot be accounted for from kind of spontaneous dynamics. It's technical, and this is where you need like information theorists and really specialist experts in neurodynamics that can design these kind of experiments. But it's something I've discussed with, for example, Andres Gomez-Emilson. I know he's got particular ideas about how you might do that. So I think there is a possibility there. The experiments are not straightforward, but I think that there is a possibility to look for that. You already see indirect, if you look at the lockout effect, for example, that tends, in my opinion, suggests that there is some kind of gating and there is some kind of control in that these entities can gate access to the space, would suggest that they have some kind of control there. the whole download effect, this flood of information as well as some kind of indirect evidence from neuroimaging, where you start to see this increase, where it looks like, if you look at the flow of neural activity across the cortex, the flow of these electrochemical waves that are flowing over the brain, the way that seems to look almost identical to the open eye state, from the primary cortex up through the high levels of the cortex, looks exactly like, as I describe in the book, looks exactly like normal vision. So it does suggest that there is some kind of information input. So the short answer is yes, I think these experiments can be designed, but I don't think it's straightforward. But hopefully in the future, these are precisely the kind of experiments that need to be done, because you're absolutely right. If something is taking control, is kind of seizing control and commandeering your world building machinery, there might be some way you can differentiate that from simple emergent activity.
And it should be a global priority if it's happening, because obviously that has huge implications. So yeah, thank you. Hopefully that will happen.
For sure, I agree. Okay, it's got to be a final question. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us. We'd love to have you back sometime. There's definitely a lot of interest. I appreciate you taking the time out to join us here tonight.
No worries. It's been fun. Been very interesting.
Everyone else, you're welcome to stay. If you have anything you want to say, contribute after Andrew leaves. He's got a hard cut. We'd love to have the conversation go a little bit longer, maybe another half hour. If you guys want to stick around and discuss things, be more than happy to keep the space open. But thank you so much, Andrew. I don't know if you have any final words or anything you want to say.
Yeah, of course, follow me. I guess everyone's probably following me already on here, but go to my website, alieninsect.net or buildingalienworlds.com, and you can check out all the other stuff, my writings, my books, and everything. And of course, go to newnautics.org if you're interested in the kind of the research, NOONAUTICS.org if you're interested in the psychedelic research that we're doing, and Elusis Mind if you want to do DMTX in the Caribbean, ELEUSISmind.com, and you can actually do DMTX on a beautiful Caribbean island. Okay, I've got to go. All right.
Thank you, Andrew. And I did post up top.
All right, great.
The links to what Andrew just mentioned and his new book is pinned up
top. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Any of you are interested.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All right, guys, I'll open up the space. You don't have to put your hands up. Go ahead, Doomer.
Yeah, I think it's awesome you got him in here, Mav. I think, and I'm very much resonant with Bruce here. The psychedelic phenomenon and the reality, and even the impact of psychedelics in the '60s, coinciding with the computer revolution and MK Ultra. There's so much overlap here, and we need to get these people into UFO spaces and talking more. There's something going on, and I think there's a psi overlap. What I would have gotten into him if he had more if he had more time, is if he was considering collaborating with Dean Radin on whether you would see amplified psi effects in people doing DMTX on the extended steady state, dissolution phase. I think it's highly likely that we would see a magnitude of psi, meaning an effect size, when normally we're just looking for statistical significance through replication and having, minor effect sizes, but statistically replicated a lot. I think we would see the opposite, and I actually think he's making a mistake by not being that interested in extending the DMT state out to several days, because I think the very, very experiments that Bruce brought up to see if there's any gating actually require more time in that state. I'm of the belief that if you did a full week, if you were able to do it safely, you would have disclosure within a week, global disclosure.
That's amazing. Just because we're talking about DMT, Has anybody had any knowledge or research done on NMT and how it affects the 1A receptor versus DMT affecting the 2A receptor? Because I've worked with 𝗓𝗂𝗃𝗃 and that has more NMT in it. And when you make it, it comes out less white and more orange because it has more NMT in it. Does anybody have any comments on that?
I've never heard of NMT. No.
Yeah, you can ask Grok about it. It's basically just like your vagus nerve. It affects that mainly, and it's the same feeling as if like you were to lie down and your whole body relaxes. It's similar to that. Um, some people say in the experiences it's like more physically euphoric versus like pure grade DMT, which is a little more cerebral. Um, but yeah, if basically from the two plant sources you can get it from mimosa and acacia. Acacia is the one with more NMT in it. So if you ever do an extraction, it'll come out more orange looking instead of white looking. And then if you want, you can purify it and stuff like that. But I feel like it's underrated in the DMT community because it's not only just euphoric, it's actually like good for your body to reduce stress and stuff like that. So yeah.
I don't know if Doomer, were you asking Bruce that question?
So sorry, my mic was stuck, Mav. Well, yeah, I'm interested in Bruce's thoughts on what he thinks it takes to crack this this psychedelic connection. Because look, Neo asked the question earlier. What does he think about the evolutionary import of DMT and the connection with the Anunnaki? And my sense is that Andrew is not fully disclosing all his wild speculations regarding the overlap with the phenomenon, but I'll give mine. I think that when you look at all of the empirical research on tryptamines, LSD, psilocybin, DMT, you're left with only one of possible, or you're only left with three possible implications. Some can be dual. One, we're seeing, and Aldous Huxley referred to this as the reducing valve. You referred to this, Mav, as the technological switch that I think Andrew referred to it as. You have certain brain regions that are down-regulated, almost quiet. So the default mode network turns off, and then other regions turn on. And that means there's an increased wiring and increased neuroplasticity in the brain when you turn a certain brain region off. So there's a firewall here that is saying the brain should not have access to this. And when you turn that firewall off, a bunch of other shit lights up in the brain. And it's not just hallucinatory shit that lights up. Some of it is enhanced abilities and enhanced sensory potential. So there are people who take LSD and they're nearsighted and they have clear vision and they're not hallucinating clear vision. They actually see more clearly. There are people who are deaf, they take LSD and they can hear the footsteps of an ant and they're not hallucinating the footsteps. They're hearing the footsteps as an ant as loud as a hammer. So there's some calibration in the brain that decides on fidelity, on sensory fidelity. And then, so you have to ask yourself, what is going on with our genetics that we have something that is regulating and down regulating sensory fidelity? In other words, not letting us have full access or potential to the brain. So that there are implications there for genetic engineering, namely that we were maybe engineered to not have full genomic potential. When you listen to Nordic abductions, people who report having seen the Nordics, full-blown Nordics, sometimes report irises that are multicolored and changing in color. If you take a look at the Anuna, by all accounts, they're incredibly violent and narcissistic. And the endogenous compound MAO, monoamine oxidase, that metabolizes away DMT, which is why you can't just orally take it and have it cross into the bloodstream and cross the blood-brain barrier. There is a rare genetic disorder where some people don't have MAO. They have to be careful about eating too many fermented foods. And the weird byproduct of this MAO thing, of this missing MAO gene, is extreme violence. So I do not think at all for a second that it is the increased amount of DMT that is resulting in this extreme violence, but a byproduct of people who don't have this thing that metabolizes away DMT is extreme psychopathy and criminality.
That's
And
such a
if
good
you,
point.
yeah,
Like,
so I'm saying here that when we look in the eyes of Nordics, we might be seeing beings that have more free flowing DMT, because the eyes are exposed brain, and that literal DMT molecule might be expressing itself in the iris of the exposed brain of the Nordics. And we even see a potential psychological signature of beings that have a gene that does not metabolize away DMT when we're looking at the Anuna. So these are, to me, indications that in order to retard us and lower our intellectual potential, DMT was drastically minimized, free flowing DMT in the brain. And this is why we're seeing so much effort in the brain to not allow for full intellectual expression.
you spoke about the MAOIs. I just want to put it out there. Majority of people use Syrian roux, or I prefer cacao chocolate, CACAO. It's a natural MAOI inhibitor, and you could use it with psilocybin as well. It's really useful. Syrian roux can be sometimes a little too intense. Um, so that's just the thing. And you're totally on point because like if a person doesn't have enough MAO in their system, they don't have DMT processing. So of course they would get grumpy. They're literally not getting the spiritual molecule. It would make anybody violent or a grouch, in some sense. So it's like you have to have your body has to have a system of processing it so it
Oh
can
well, no, I
DMT can
mean,
be digested.
here it's the opposite, right? So I don't know if they've done samples on how much. I don't know if they've done spinal taps on people with the MAO missing gene, and to see if they have more DMT in their brain. I would assume that they do, but I don't know what they've done. But they would definitely be able to take oral DMT and have it have an effect on them. That we know for sure. And those people are more violent. So the people who don't need MAOI are almost all criminal, right? And I'm saying maybe they were sloppy. I'm suggesting the opposite here. I'm saying maybe they were sloppy and they said, all right, we're going to introduce this gene to make to so that there's this enzyme that metabolizes away DMT if you orally ingest it, so that these humans can't just eat their way to hyperintelligence. And I'm saying that it's interesting that we have Anuna that are incredibly violent, and we have Nordics with possible DMT in their irises, and then we have humans who don't have a lot of DMT, right? But I'm not saying, I don't think at all that the violence is an expression of overexpressed DMT. I think something else is a byproduct of that gene being turned off.
Yeah, there's
That's
there's
very
something especially to like quantum consciousness and how dimethyltryptamine or DMT is related to enhancing that, especially with technology. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this, but I've done DMT and then my phone like responds to your thoughts. So like I won't even touch anything and something will pop up and I'll be like, oh, obviously it's like it can hear you to some extent. And then like, just in general, most people that work with entheogens, they have those like magical moments where synchronicities just line up and everything just correlates. Like I think there's definitely like quantum consciousness has to do with that for sure. And when I first started out with it, the surface layer of quantum consciousness was like the book The Secret, just like how your thoughts affect reality. And then like the lower layers scientifically is like quantumly your consciousness is affecting part of your reality, more than just physical affecting it. Like your thoughts are changing what's happening around you. And that's always been interesting to see in real time because you can take psilocybin and it happens, but you can take DMT and then it happens pretty instantly, like pretty fast. And I've always noticed that for sure.
I think that's a really important point, and I want to try to be as clear as possible here. When Andrew was talking about what the brain is doing, or are we really seeing a mantid, we kind of have a problem here because DMT is only effective in the brain because it's docking onto receptors and everybody's holding. So, Mav, you may have had a DMT experience when you experienced Jesus, and that doesn't mean it wasn't really Jesus. But it's most likely, or it's very possible that both was true. You could have experienced a genuine Jesus encounter, but that the interface of your brain may have only allowed for your consciousness to interface with Jesus by being overflooded with DMT. And DMT is neuroprotective, and it's not just neuroprotective. It increases neuroplasticity, and it's also neurogenic. It is, in fact, the most neurogenic compound that we've ever discovered, including synthesized compounds. So we have here something that literally grows intelligence, and the brain is limiting it, and the body is limiting it. I don't think the brain is limiting it directly, but there is this universal sense that your memory is being wiped after a DMT experience, and you're grasping to hold on to all of the insight that you just had. So it seems like the body is heavily modulating how much reality is allowed to break through, and why would the body even need to regulate how much reality is breaking through if the brain didn't have a higher potential to allow more through to begin with? It's very weird that we have a default mode network that when you turn it off, your brain is able to do more, right? So normally, if you're able to do something or you're not able to do something, that's just it. We have a body that is constantly saying no, don't allow the brain to have its fully expressed potential, and we should all be highly suspicious and paranoid and skeptical about what the fuck is going on, right? Like we don't see this in other animals. We don't see them like have a potential for 120 IQ, but they're only functioning at 40 IQ, and the brain is like, no, don't be this smart. That is exactly what is happening when we're looking at psychedelic research.
How do you feel about I just think it can be simple in a way. Like I think when you dream at night, your brain is releasing DMT. That DMT is basically a waking dream state, a lucid waking dream state. And the pineal gland related to the pituitary and all those things. So like it would make sense, because not only humans have a pineal gland, animals have a pineal gland. And animals like dogs and cats and birds, they sleep and they dream. And so I agree with you that there's something about the human function that makes it so we have a limit in the ability of how much DMT we can process at once. But I don't think it's like a lock in. I think partly it could be, there's a time and place for the future where DMT will become more prevalent in society and we would be able to use it as its purposeful function, which is to elevate our consciousness and bring us to the light. And, but if you want to go with like the biological science of it, yeah, every night when you dream, your brain releases some amount of DMT. It's partially what makes you dream at night. And that's why when you do mushrooms or ayahuasca or DMT itself, you're going into a waking dream state where you're completely lucid. So you're perceiving all these things in a same brain state where you can be like, what's 8 times 8? 64. What's the year? 2026. Who is your family members? Who is this? And then on top of that, you have people experiencing Jesus. I've had that many times. I'll be doing DMT and lying in bed and just rocking back and forth in my sleep, and I'll have a conversation with Jesus that's very lucid in my dreams. And the same thing, if you want to talk about entities, I've had it with Lucy as well. So both entities come into play, and I just think it's such an amazing thing of itself. But yeah, those experiences are very very real.
Bruce, just jump in, man.
Yeah, so I just want to counter that a bit. I mean, despite all the research, there's no evidence of a link between DMT and dreaming. Just to clarify that, that has been looked at, and a lot of people have speculated on that, but there really isn't.
There's a lot of evidence
There
that
isn't
they
any
go
link
together.
shown that DMT production in the brain changes relative to sleep, or that dreams are linked to DMT. And
Well,
people check
pineal
that
gland
rather than
releases
getting into it.
melatonin.
I say people
The
can have a
pineal
look at
gland.
that. By all means, people can fact check that, but I think they'll find comfortably that there's no link shown. The interesting thing about that as well is that dreaming and DMT experiences aren't very alike. That they're not actually alike.
I would
And this is, if
disagree.
anyone reads
I think they're very alike.
Gallimore's work, he clarifies this as well, that one of the key points is that DMT takes you into states with extreme novelty. The information that you receive is novel to you. That is, my dreams are all built around things that we understand within this reality, with this world, your experiences, things you've seen, things that you can imagine. The DMT experiences are different, and that's the principal argument for why this could be a hack, is that people are receiving scenarios and information that is external to anything that they know in this world, anything that they could have conceptualized or dreamt of, that they don't coincide with dreams at all, and they are very different.
But you do know that the pineal gland releases melatonin, right?
But we shouldn't conflate melatonin and DMT experiences.
I'm not. Let me explain. The pineal gland releases melatonin, and melatonin is related to serotonin, and DMT directly affects serotonin receptors, right? Like the 2A and the 1A receptor. So if serotonin and melatonin are literally related to the DMT
Sure.
molecule, it would make sense that somehow melatonin, because it's released during sleep, is connected to DMT that could also be released during sleep.
Well, again, people can fact check it, but no evidence so far has linked dreaming to DMT, despite many people theorizing it might do. That nothing has turned up to
I
suggest.
think I could find some evidence.
Again, people can fact check it. I won't argue with you, but people can fact check that.
What I think is interesting that supports Bruce is what people are explaining as their experiences with DMT versus dreaming are completely different.
Absolutely different. Yeah, and that's not based on people think it might be aliens. Is because you wouldn't, in your dreams. I don't think aliens are giving me my dreams. Do you ever think that? I would never wake up and think aliens must have given me those dreams, because you're not receiving scenarios that are so far out that you think this must have come from an alien mind. I mean, I'm not going to say that's never happened to anyone on the whole planet with all the dreams they've had, but that is certainly not typical. We don't see people making the claim that their dreams are so, far out from anything they've seen on TV or experienced or could imagine, that they think it must be aliens giving me my dreams. But yet with DMT experiences, it's very common for people to say this experience is coming from an alien mind.
What about the possibility of those who say they receive downloads, right? What if that is, I don't know how it would even be possible, but DMT is possibly released at a higher level at those times where these people supposedly get a breakthrough in technology, a breakthrough in physics, and they feel like it was some type of download they received. You think that's a possibility? That there is ability for whatever these things are to increase the amount of DMT?
Again, I mean, we can say it's possible, but it's just so hard to, how do we evaluate? 'Cause it's a bit like the paranormal issues with ghosts and stuff. They just appear and go again, and no one can really evaluate that it happened to you. So it's a really tough one to say, because unless you had someone who was being, scrutinized, who was known to have kind of download experiences, and we were sort of monitoring their, their biological systems, that we could see that something was happening to them. Otherwise, yeah, we really, again, you're left, well, Andrew said that we can sort of speculate anything, but it's really hard to test some of these ideas. And so the scientists are limited to where, we can all freely speculate on here, on X and stuff, obviously. But like, if we're going to try and test it, it becomes really hard. You need to have somebody who agrees to be monitored really closely, that we can see whether the levels of DMT are fluctuating or something in their brain, whilst they're trying to have these kind of either connecting with something or incidentally having downloads. If they regularly claim to have, downloads like that, then that would be, I think it's checkable. If you hack, there are people who claim that they have regular, downloads from aliens. So these are something that should be done. And again, that's, I think, with the experiences, there's something I've always called for, I think, is that we should have volunteers from people who claim to have regular contact with aliens, who agree to be in some kind of monitoring program, and that we do closely study them. They do wear, like equipment and stuff, and we do monitor, because like that is doable. Like I can't fly into the air and catch like a UFO. None of us can do that, right? I would say that's we need the military and all this kind of crap. But we do have people on the ground who are saying they're having those experiences, and those people could be studied properly, and then we would get answers to questions like that.
So part of this is a matter of ethics and a lack of ambition, and we no longer live in the Wild West. And especially when it comes to everything regarding the brain, we're way behind in our research. The reason why we're not making breakthroughs in Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and CTE is in part due to ethics of the experiments, but is also in part due to the lack of ambition. So
And money and the funding,
money and the funding, but really, it's not like it would require that much money. It's that the funding doesn't care to be associated, right, with those kinds of things. But I think we absolutely. So if you wanted to know whether DMT is being released in the REM phase of sleep, you could probably easily get. I mean, you could do a constant spinal tap or something, and then you could also do a Neuralink to actually have electrodes embedded in certain areas of the brain. The pineal gland is deep in the center, so you have a structural problem there. How do you access the pineal gland? So you would have to infer it based on what is in cerebrospinal fluid. But you also probably need to do some stuff that would look absolutely crazy. And I do think it's going to take somebody who does an extended 1 week steady state on DMT to answer these really hard questions. So until science gets to a place where we're saying, all right, we have somebody crazy who's willing to do this, a lot of these questions are going to remain unanswered.
Go ahead, nothing.
I just had a quick question for Doomer and anybody else who knows. But Doomer, you said that DMT is neuroprotective, neurogenic, and increases neuroplasticity. Does that also include psilocybin and LSD?
Yes, it does, but not to the same degree. So my understanding is that both in psilocybin and LSD, we see neurogenesis within hours. To be clear, human neurogenesis occurs over at least 3 weeks, usually 3 to 4. So dedicated, concentrated practice. You get from from imaginal stem cell to a fully specialized neural stem cell, and then even more specialized over like 60 days to 90 days. But you need at least 3 to 4 weeks. Psilocybin and LSD, you're looking at about hours, and this is from biopsied rat studies. And then DMT, we're talking minutes. So within minutes, you have what normally takes 3 to 4 weeks.
So just one dose would equal
Yeah,
weeks of okay.
yeah.
So,
That's based on rat studies, but absolutely, that's the kind of effect size we're looking at here.
I mean, that's crazy. That would be helpful with people with traumatic brain injuries. That'd be helpful. I guess that's why we're looking into that with people who have severe PTSD. Yeah, that's crazy.
That's why it's a crime that this substance has not been fully legalized. At the very least, we should be administering it to people who are dying. Right. Like there's from my view, we're keeping people stupid.
So, Doomer, what do you speculate would happen to a human being if they took a DMTX intravenal
If you did it a
for
week,
1 week?
I would assume that every single thing that Dean Radin tests for would be at 100x to maybe a 10,000x magnitude. I think we would see a live demonstration. I'm not sure about levitation, but everything from spoon bending to telepathy to some measurable psychokinesis, whether you can push a penny. I think we see all these subtle effects in random number generators, and they're statistically significant, but they're subtle. What we need is a large effect size, a huge magnitude, and I think we'd get it in a week, so large that nobody would give a fuck about replication.
So
When you say
that would be
DMTX,
similar to the movie Lucy.
Oh, I don't think I saw it, but something like that. Yeah. I mean, look, what do we think is happening
Brother.
with? I would think it would push. It would literally create catastrophic disclosure.
And I think in the Lucy, was that DMTX that she had in her stomach that leaked out. Then she gained 100% use of her brain versus 10%.
What is DMTX? Is it like DMT or is it different than DMT?
So DMTX is for experienced subjects people who've done DMT before. That I think Andrew Gallimore is the only person who does this, but he administers intravenous DMT for longer than your standard, 5 to 10, or I think Strassman did like 5 to 15 minutes. I think he did like 15, max 30. But DMTX will allow the experiencer, I think, to go much longer. I think Danny Goler has the record for 3.5 hours. So it allows like a much more calibrated and extenuated steady
Is
state
it a
DMT
different
experience.
chemical itself?
No,
Is it
it
a
just means
No, it's
extended
not.
state. X
It's
is
just
Oh,
extended state.
Yeah,
okay. Okay.
we're just talking about NN-DMT here.
Was I right, Goose, or nuts about Lucy that that was DMT and capsules?
I've never watched it.
You guys
No,
are killing me. It's something else. It's not DMTX. But I mean, if I'm sure if they would have called it DMTX, people would have like looked into it and be like, oh shit, maybe, right? So I think they just kind of had to make up their own fucking name for it because um yeah, because this shit is no joke, dude. Like for real, this DMT shit is no fucking joke, dude. Like the fact that our body just creates it naturally, and what Doomer's saying, um, Doomer can be like an evolutionary thing. It can't be like you were saying that
It
the
kind of
whole it
can't.
makes people.
To be honest with you, Goose. I mean, yes, it has. You can say DMT in
Bro, come
general
on
can
though.
have an evolution. No, DMT in general absolutely probably has an evolutionary function. But the way that DMT exists or performs in the human body cannot be explained through traditional Darwinian evolution, right? Because
unless you go with
So what I'm
unless
saying
you
is,
go with
what if it's
dreaming
like
theory.
what if it's like a specific like feature in a human, and that's what passed that on was that feature. It had nothing to do with the DMT. It was just maybe like you were saying that specific um setup makes you angry or whatever. Or that specific what were you saying?
so I'll back up here. There we have an enzyme called MAO, monoamine oxidase, and this is the enzyme that is responsible, I think, for metabolizing like fermented foods, cheeses, meats, that kind of stuff. And this enzyme is also the enzyme that metabolizes away DMT when you orally ingest it. So it's why you need to combine it, I think, with like a harmaline in ayahuasca, so that when you orally ingest DMT, it doesn't get metabolized away and it crosses into the bloodstream. All right. But what I am saying is that the DMT experiences that
Is
people are
that
having,
evolutionary?
no, I don't think it is. I mean, maybe, but I don't think so.
What?
Why would it be evolutionary, Goose? If DMT is supposed to cross the blood-brain barrier, why would it be evolutionary that something doesn't want it to cross into the bloodstream?
Because if you're too high on DMT, it makes it hard to function in regular society to some extension. It's the
But
same
that's
thing
like
if you're high
saying,
on too much mushrooms.
right, but you could easily have more DMT cross in without being too high. I'm saying we are having these experiences by overriding our system, and our brain is able to deal with the DMT, but the brain doesn't want the brain to be able to deal with the DMT. So we
Well,
have a system here that is fighting itself.
you can do micro doses of DMT. Like if you have a DMT pen, you don't have to do a full blast. You can literally just do one puff, and you
Correct.
can feel a slight enhancement. And
Correct. So
it's
that would be defeating your own argument here, right? The body clearly could modulate and allow for more DMT into the bloodstream. What we are dealing with here is feeding an endogenous substance to the body that is in many cases beneficial, and the body is choosing to keep us dumber. And the question is why? And you cannot make an evolutionary argument for fitness when the body is fighting evolutionary fitness.
well, I
If
think
somebody
you're
can
coming
make
at
that
this
argument, I'm willing to hear
from
it.
like an MAO versus an MAOI, right? You need an MAOI to make DMT activated. And so the purpose, if you've ever taken Syrian rue extract or cacao chocolate, if you take too much, you can have like almost serotonin syndrome by having too much MAOI in your body. And so, yeah, there's an evolutionary purpose behind not having too much DMT in your system at once. The MAOI keeps it in check for a reason. You know, like I go back to the dreaming theory, where it's like if you were dreaming that heavily all the time, there'd be certain tasks that might be difficult to do. For example, like physical tasks. So there is, it's not just, I would,
No, you cannot
I,
argue, resonance, you cannot argue that it's an evolutionary benefit that the body requires you to exogenously add another substance so that you can process another substance. That's not an evolutionary mechanism, right? Like you need to
but
get
you
your
don't
argument
have to.
straight
You
here.
can increase your MAOI naturally. Like prayer, for
No,
example, increases it naturally. Emotion itself increases it
okay.
naturally. Chocolate
MAOI is the
increases it
inhibitor.
naturally.
MAOI is the inhibitor, and the
And that's
natural
what you,
substance that we have is MAO, right? All I'm saying is you cannot say that it is a natural evolutionary process when you have to mix ayahuasca for one of the substances that is already endogenous, right? You have to pick one end of the spectrum here or another. You can say, oh, it's great that we're not too smart. That can be your opinion. But you cannot say that it is an evolutionary mechanism that somebody has to come up with an ayahuasca formula in order to accept an endogenous substance.
you already have MAOI in your system. Your body already
You have
works
MAO. You have MAO in
MAO,
your
but it
system.
can become MAOI. Like, for example, you can
No,
have DMT states without DMT through meditation, through dark rooms. There are ways to
correct.
activate
But that's
DMT in the pineal
correct.
gland without external
Correct.
substances. So,
You're absolutely
meaning
right. And
MAO
that's a
and
really important
DMT
point.
naturally can be produced in the brain without an external substance. So,
So
there must be some.
it's a really important point that you can absolutely produce some sort of DMT like stages without the introduction of MAOI. Now, in those stages, what is not happening is the body is not producing MAOI to combat MAO so that DMT can then go into the bloodstream. That's not what's happening. Somehow, likely through the lungs, DMT is being produced, it's entering the bloodstream, and it's crossing the blood-brain barrier, right? But the body is not producing MAOI to fight its own MAO. That's not happening in that instance.
I can see what you mean by that. I probably should look more into the sciences of it, but I, respectfully to you, I get your point for sure.
Well, I'm only saying we have a conception of evolution here that does not work for the explanation of any of our DMT research.
I got a
Unless you
question.
go with the
My
dream
question is,
theory, then it's
how come everyone who's taking DMT sounds like Doomer when they talk?
They don't all sound like me. I mean, I think most
No,
people
I'm
don't.
being serious. Like, you guys are like at a whole different level, and I'm wondering if you guys were the same way prior to.
I'm debating taking a lot too now because I want to sound like Doomer.
Right? Right, Nuts?
Yeah.
Was I the only one taking that?
So
No,
That's a very reasonable
I
thought,
think if
of
man.
you
every
listen to Danny Goler, you'll find somebody who sounds almost the opposite of me. Most people in their psychedelic experiences do not end up with the suspicion that the human genome has been engineered.
No, fuck that, dude. Doomer, give me your contacts, connect, bro. I want what Doomer has, bro.
Anyway, there's other hands here. I don't want to dominate the floor.
Okay, before we get to other hands, another announcement. We are not recommending that you take any type of illegal psychedelics. This is disclaimer. This is for educational and research purposes only and entertainment. Okay, now we can go to Bruce.
Yeah, it's a two-part. I mean, one, again, to be negative Nelly, but there's no scientific evidence that anything you do, like meditation, breath work, dark rooms, or anything like that is changing levels of DMT in the brain. Just again, people can fact check that. The other thing I would say is that DMT is inherently mysterious. Like in terms of evolutionary terms, we don't know why it's in all these plants. right? It's also ubiquitous in the plant kingdom. We don't know why. We don't know what it's doing in those plants. There is some evidence that its levels fluctuate during the day and night. So there's a reason why some of these plants like chacruna and stuff are picked at specific times by indigenous people, because it actually turns out they have higher levels of DMT in the leaves at those times. So we don't know why that is. It may be a connection to do with processing sunlight, but again, that's totally just at the moment a speculative hypothesis some people have. So we don't know why it's there. We don't know why it's in animals. We don't know why it's in the brain. So you've got to remember there's a big question mark over the whole thing of why is it in any of us? Why is it in any plant? So when we talk evolutionary terms, we really don't know what it's doing in the plants even. So we're a long way from understanding whether it had an evolutionary benefit in the human lineage. We also don't know whether ancient humans had higher or lower levels of DMT being processed in their system. So we wouldn't know which way evolution is even taking this. Is it something being phased out or something that's been increasing? So these kind of questions are not really answerable at this time, but obviously they're part of that bigger mystery, because if it's something that's increasing, then there must be a benefit. If it's decreasing, then perhaps it didn't have any. But so these are things that make it really hard to say whether or not there's this evolutionary factor at play. But we definitely know it's important for plants because it's in so many of them. So it's doing something.
It's always the plants, man. Yo, peyote just grows out here, man. Should I just stick to DMT?
And I speak for ayahuasca more. I haven't done a lot smoking DMT, but I have used ayahuasca in a legal setting because I lived in Ecuador and I brewed my own ayahuasca, and that's perfectly legal in Ecuador. So, so perhaps the difference between Dreamer and I is I'm more ayahuasca and he's more DMT.
Wait, so Bruce, you've never done DMT,
I
like a
have, but
vaporized cartridge?
only a couple of times, but I've used ayahuasca more times.
Okay.
Resonant, I wanted to ask you about your what you call the quantum consciousness synchronicities, particularly when or after you took DMT or had your DMT trips. Did you notice the frequency more directly after your trips?
Yeah, definitely. It happens during the trip and after. There's like, you'll notice like license plates on cars will have specific meanings. You'll have something pop up in front of you at just the right time, and it'll say that one thing, and you're like, wow, I was just thinking that. And then you'll be walking
Mhm.
and you'll find like a random object, and it's like, wow, this object was related to what I was just thinking about. And then just stuff like that, synchronicities where it's just God winking at you through your experience. It happens very frequently on DMT. I would say the quantum consciousness aspect of that is that, yeah, part of your brain has been elevated to reach the quantum state. So you're on that frequency. So because you're that close to the frequency, more frequent things like synchronicities start to happen.
Got it. And I always find it interesting when it happens. Say there's a very low chance of something happening. Say like you say this word that you haven't said in your language for years, and then all of a sudden, simultaneously in a coinciding conversation or directly on your form of media, it happens at exactly the same time. Those types of synchronicities, I notice just happening more and more throughout life, um,
Yeah, definitely.
as a
I don't.
present for me.
Who is speaking right now? I don't see it on my phone.
Vincent.
Vincent, got you. Okay. Yeah, no, I don't know if you've ever heard about glossolalia. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but it's speaking in tongues. I speak to entities like Lucifer and Jesus, and I speak in glossolalia and then English and then back to glossolalia. Like a really good example of it is like scatting in music. People are like ba da da ba da da ba. You just put that with words, and then it's kind of glossolalia, for example. But it's like a primal form of language without the format of language itself. Just using the alphabet that you're familiar with. And I found that DMT makes it very effortless and easy to do that, where you have a clear, coherent narrative and you understand the meaning of your expression when you say it. Does anybody know what glossolalia or speaking in tongues is and how it's related to DMT? It's even ayahuasca and psilocybin or the tryptamines in general.
Yo, I want to get to some of these hands. I'm not really sure who was next between Neo and Introspect. So
Please, sir, and introspect. Go first.
Appreciate you, Neo. Thank you. And Goose, appreciate it. Mr. Mav, great space. Sorry to, uh, I was getting disconnected here. I wasn't sure what's going on, but thank you for letting me come back up. But the relevance that I was listening to, and I'm over here just I don't even know if there's a really coherent way to describe it without being offensive in some respect, but not everybody's built the same. You know, not some people aren't able to produce certain chemicals in their brains to allow them to think, and not everybody's exactly the same at all. And so the telekinesis and all these other attributes we're talking about, deep meditation and the qigong energies that people can do miraculous thing with. There's a spectrum of capabilities and vision and hearing in every angle. And there was a point of time when there was more telepathic communication was more common. Um, and still to this day, there's children and people who speak telepathically with their parents. It's documented. Um, but anyway, my point to the DMT is that this is a reflection of of different frequencies. And I wanted to point out that I have took a screenshot of a description of the brainwave changes under DMT in the purple pill for you. I'll read a little bit of it. It's actually very relevant to what you're talking about. Is that when people take DMT, it alters the electrical activity across many uh, frequency bands, right? And so, but it causes a sharp drop in the waking side of the uh, brain rhythm, and then there's a short-lived surge in lower frequencies, and the alpha waves from 8 to 12 hertz will decrease. This is your wakeful dominant state. The beta waves drop as well from 13 to 30 hertz. But the interesting thing is that theta and the delta waves between 1 and 8 hertz display a transient, short lived increase or emergence during the peak of the experience, mimicking brain activity seen during REM dreaming sleep and supporting vivid internal imagery. The most fascinating part is that gamma waves above 30 hertz show localized increase in posterior regions, which are tied to heightened sensory processing and complex visual hallucinations. So the point is that I'm trying to get to is that in every field, the military has seen these capabilities. And trust me, that they've gone out and figured out how to expedite that process. In terms of the ketogenics, remember that you could go months and try to get into keto, but they made a ketone ester pill for combat operators in a short operation to take it and get the same effects. And so they try to like simplify this technically as much as possible in every instance. And in terms of like people being into this induced frequency without having to ingest DMT, like you're missing the whole point when you're talking about having to take it. The brain does this action when you sleep, when you die, and all these different circumstances and shock and trauma. Your nervous system is an electrical system. And this induction, and I can tell you an example of how this works. You listen to these frequencies, these binaural hemisync frequencies. People have out of body experiences on those things. And these are very lucid, novel, um, dictation, experiential situations that these frequencies produce when you're listening to it. or you're being subjected to it, because many of these other circumstances that, like even Bob Lazar mentioned, that the aliens have the ability to anesthetize the human mind. And that is frequency control of the brain remotely. So alien didn't have to go give you DMT for him to communicate with you. Just as telepathic people don't need a Neuralink to be synchronized in hive mind. But you can have very profound results from being able to specifically engage those brain waves that replicate that circumstance without having to take anything else. But that's all I got to say. Thank you for letting me share that.
Introspect, how many times have you done DMT?
That's a stupid question, but I'm going to drop down and listen. Thank you.
Go for it, Neo.
Pretty safe. Thanks to everyone as well. I'm going to drop down. It's really late here. But yeah, super appreciate the chats. Yeah. Take care.
Thanks for joining the conversation, Bruce. Go ahead, Neo. We lost him. Go ahead, Doomer. And then after Doomer, I'm going to be rugging the space out. Go ahead, Doomer.
It's really good that Introspect pointed out that there are brainwaves, and I think it's true in that post that he says there's no one specific brainwave associated with DMT, but rarely do you hear researchers actually be honest about what's happening in the frequencies with DMT that's interesting. Namely, if you look at that chart and you see the gamma brainwave region be summarized as 30 to 100 hertz, that's a meaningless statement. So you can say that gamma is between 30 and 40, but once you put in additional 70 hertz and you just throw that all into gamma, it's a useless thing. It's like taking the entire rainbow and just calling it one color. There are higher states above 40 hertz of gamma. Typically, they're referred to as hyper gamma. And there's lambda, which is typically between 100 and 200 hertz. But we're talking about peak experiences that are associated in anything that is above 40 hertz. And here, we're not talking about love and lighter frequencies like feelings or patchouli or lavender. We're actually talking about electromagnetic frequencies and cycles per consciousness. For some people, the distinction matters because these are frequencies that you can actually measure and they're actually real. And what's really important is that if you take a look at the gateway papers are talking about electromagnetic frequencies. And we actually have a physics explanation here for transcending space and time. So when we're talking about craft, advanced propulsion, that is bending time and space, we're often talking about, in some cases, when it comes to 𝗧𝗶𝘁𝗶𝘁𝗋, of overcoming the Planck distance. And some people believe that Planck distance is crossed by limiting the actual wavelength by increasing the frequency. And there's a paper here. I'll push it. It's many people have seen this paper. It's the human teleportation patent, and this really has to do with Ashton Forbes kind of stuff, MH370 kind of stuff. Anybody who's researching nuts and bolts, but it actually talks about hyperspace, presumably the same space that people go into in the DMT world, and we're talking just hardcore steely physics here. And what I'm saying is, it's very possible that the cycles per second of consciousness that we're experiencing have been dampened down so that we do not tap into another form of reality. So in other words, if our regular gamma state was not 40 hertz, but was something more like 100 or 200, it would be a common thing for us to peer more behind the veil, to see more of the future, or to even interact in the realms of these other beings. It's very simple for us to imagine, if we didn't have 400 to 700 nanometers of sensory perception, but we had I don't know, 400 to 1,000 nanometers of perception. The difference would be that everybody could see these fucking UFOs in the terahertz frequency. That's not a big stretch for people to imagine. Well, it's also very possible that when people are taking DMT, their brains are cycling at a constant state way higher than 40 hertz. And that the only thing that is required for you to engage in that other realm is to have a brain that oscillates at a higher frequency, a higher clock speed. And we all know that certain clock speeds are needed in order to make our current LLMs work. The idea that a higher clock speed is needed to deal with these entities that might be the jinn or who knows is not a crazy idea. We're just talking about a higher frequency that might actually unlock a manipulation of the speed of C, right? So this is all we're talking about here. If you look at the human teleportation patent, I should have pushed up the native thing, and I don't know if this physics is real. Like, it could be wrong, but we're just looking at extended electrodynamics and a modulation of frequency. Might actually allow your consciousness to interface with a different space and time and other beings, and it might be that simple. And unless you've done DMT, the contention that it's exactly the same thing as binaural beats or hemispheric synchronization, that kind of delusion requires you to never do DMT. There are no people, is not a single person of these 8 billion people who's ever done hemisync and who's ever done DMT and thinks that they're equivalent. And that's because physically you're working under a different brain.
It swaps your brains. It swaps your brain from opposite sides to each other. I don't know. That's freaking insane, dude.
I mean,
Crazy shit.
Goose, have you ever heard anybody on hemisync say that when they took an inhale, they couldn't feel the tension in their diaphragm? They didn't know whether they were on an inhale or exhale because even the buildup of carbon dioxide or the need for oxygen was a sensation that left their body. Have you ever heard anybody say that they couldn't feel the tension in their lungs? Right? Like, there's definitely some overlap. And if you're looking at the gateway papers, you're probably accessing many of the same frequencies and you're going to many of the same places, but it's not the same brain that's doing it, right?
I would
There's
agree.
physiologically a different thing happening.
There's also, if anybody gets a chance to do this, it's not for everybody because it's a little extreme, but if you have a nicotine vaporizer, a cannabis cartridge, and a DMT cartridge, what's really kind of really fun to do, and it's safe to do, is that if you breathe in DMT and then hold your breath or just inhale it to the deeper lungs, and then breathe in nicotine and then breathe in cannabis, your lungs do this absorption thing where like you can take a big rip of cannabis and then take a big rip of DMT, and it's like your lungs get fresh air. So then you can take another rip of cannabis and then another rip of DMT, and you get fresh air. So what's really fun is that I think DMT has this one quality where it like you're allowed to have like another deep breath, so you can just keep stacking. And then when you finally take that exhale, it's probably one of the most euphoric things you can ever feel. But yeah, if anybody gets a chance to, just in like without exhaling, just inhale cannabis, inhale DMT, inhale nicotine, and just keep that on a cycle until you feel satisfied. And then when you breathe out, that exhale breath will be one of the most euphoric feelings you could ever have. That's safe for you. That's not going to hurt you. That's actually like that your brain will be like, wow, thank you. Like that was amazing. It's really cool. So that's something you guys can work with.
Go for it, Neo.
Yo, brother, thank you.
Once again, we are not promoting the use of illicit drugs in this space.
Absolutely not. Thank you for keeping up with my fucking technical difficulties here. NHI doesn't want me to talk. I want to say, like, from my own experience, I believe these like brain frequencies are very, very important because all of these are attack vectors where the human mind can be manipulated. I've had various experiences where I was brought into some sort of sleep paralysis and stuff like that. I'm very experienced in binaural beats with the Monroe Institute, and to contradict Bruce, and I love what Bruce said, not to take it personal, but I believe dreams and this like other side of this experience, I believe it's in some way, shape, or form connected.
Oops, looked like we dropped him.
Yeah, he just cut out for me too.
Bro, Neo, no way, bro. This guy's been falling off
Yo,
so
Mav,
many
can I jump in here
times.
for a second?
Go ahead, Aaron, and then we're gonna rug it.
All right, cool. Yeah, I figured I'd make a summary statement. I'm 2 minutes away from watching a bunch of midgets do wrestling in Midland, Texas, because apparently that's a thing that's happening tonight. So that's what we're going to do. I think Doomer and I need to do a co-host space together talking about psychedelic experiences in DMT and dive into a lot of this stuff, because there's so many nuances. There's so many nuances, and I appreciate just having the dialogue. Again, not encouraging the use of illegal substances. That said, if you were to get in a place where it is legal, DMT is something. One thing I would want to mention to people: you don't have to do the breakthrough dose. I think that's a stereotypical traditional framework that you have to do it that way. I have some of the most profound experience I've had on DMT have just been one hit and just being present. It like raises the water table of your awareness. You're not blasting through your default mode network, so you're able to kind of cognize your experience and engage it. And so the DMT and other substances, if you feel called to them or they call to you, usually you'll end up meeting somebody that has it or makes it. Like, it'll happen if it's supposed to happen, because you don't want to rush anything like that either. It's been very important for me, I think, like I said, being grounded in my psychology and just in life and how to deal with life over the last, over 33 years, helps me having these ecstatic experiences to be able to be anchored and grounded. And that is important. So not everybody can handle it at any given season of their life, like to have that kind of detachment from your 3D experiences in that way. Yeah, like he was saying before, Andrew was saying before when he was on, like, you can't guarantee whatever your experience is going to be like. So there is openness to trusting God, trusting the universe, trusting the circumstances that you're going to experience what it is you need to experience. And I would say for me, maybe for a lot of people, it's not necessarily about the one-time ecstatic extreme experience. I think part of it is doing things on multiple times and multiple doses so that you can actually more thoroughly integrate the experience, and it's not just a one-time thing. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say. Everybody, please, if you haven't already, repost the space. It is recorded, so people can listen to it in the future. Follow Mav and anyone else found interesting on here, because this is it's awesome to be able to have these spaces.
Thank you, Aaron. Enjoy your little people toss or wrestling that you're going to. I just want to use the proper terminology because I don't want to violate terms of service. I
Hey,
think
on
the
the on
space
the
is
on
good.
the on the Facebook promotion, it was midget wrestling. So I am using the official social media terms, at least.
There's
So you had to repeat it once again.
there's one
Go ahead,
thing,
Joe.
if I can mention, just for people that might do this. Um, if you start out with a big dose, which if you're a beginner, I would just do one puff, like Aaron said. Um, you can do a big dose and you have the whole experience. One thing that I don't hear talked about a lot is that you can do it another big rip, another big intake of air or vapor, and you won't have the same big experience, right? But there's still getting up to the edge of it. So there's like a reclination, you know? And I've learned if you just want to experience DMT as like a pleasurable leisure activity instead of just consciousness exploration, you can work your way up to the climax point, and then once you're there, you can try to get up to the climax point again, and you'll only get so far. So if you're afraid of, like, there are people out there that are like, "Whoa, that was too much for me. I don't want to. That was way too much. If you just say to them, look, you can do this again, and it won't be that level of experience, and you can just casually enjoy it in a peaceful, pleasant way, like sipping on it like a simple nicotine vaporizer. So it's not a big climactic experience every time you take 3 puffs. First time you take 3 puffs, yeah, it is a big experience, but you can wait literally a minute and take the same amount in the 3 puffs that you take after that first climax. And when you do that, it's just euphoria and like godful pleasantness. And so that's something I think we're gonna figure out eventually as a community of like, hey, after the big experience, you can do the same amount of vapor and you'll just it won't be so shocking. It won't be so expanding. It'll be still one of the best things you experience, but now that you've had the big experience, you have to basically wait. You have to like I found out if you want to have another big experience like that, you have to.
Okay, we're not going to discuss this any further into how much or where and what and how many breaths. Uh, we're going to rug the space. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us here tonight. Big shout out to my 3 co-hosts. I've never had to happen, but I got a screenshot. I had 3 co-hosts. I had Nuts, Goose, and Guy all at the same time. I don't even know how that's even possible. But guys, thank you for joining us here tonight, and everyone else for joining the conversation. It was very interesting. Big shout out to Andrew for joining. And just a reminder, pinned up top is his latest book. I know Bruce read through it and DM me saying it was very good and worth a read. So and make sure you give Andrew a follow as well. Taking the time out to be with us tonight to answer all these questions. And who knows, we might be able to get him back once again because I know a lot of people had questions that weren't answered, or maybe you have more questions you'd like to ask him in the future. But thank you everyone for joining, and see you all tomorrow night at 7 p.m.